Ho, 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 hello to our Christmas episode of Picture This, 1946. There's only a few years in the barrel of Oscar nomination history that have Christmas films. Last year, we were lucky to find a year that had two in one year. We didn't have that luxury this time, but we did find one pretty notable Christmas film. It's a Wonderful Life, which was nominated for Best Picture, and we decided why not make that this month and talk about all the movies nominated that month, that being The Best Years of Our Lives, Henry V, It's a Wonderful Life, The Razor's Edge, and The Yearling. Just getting those out the gate right now, just so I don't forget later. I'm joined, of course, by my co-host Chad Webb, who's here to talk about the year of 1946 with me. Chad, how you doing? Happy holidays, buddy.
I'm doing great. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. It's going to be interesting. We got the two other ones out of the way, and then now we're getting this great film out of the way, Christmas film. And then we're just going to have to, every December, we're going to have to figure out something to do. Maybe like films that involve family or goodwill to man,
Sure.
something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we'll figure out theming. I mean, theming's easy until themes run out. But
Right.
we'll be able to tease next month, which is going to be another fun theme kind of series we're doing later in the beginning of the month, the beginning of the year next year. I mean, this is our season finale, I guess, of the show, season 2 of the show, which is kind of fun. So at the end, I also have a little bit of kind of like a ceremony honoring the year of Picture This. A little something planned at the end, but why don't we get to these films? And before we get to these films, let's talk about the year itself, 1946. Chad and I, not even a thought. Our parents probably weren't even a thought. Yeah, mine definitely weren't. My grandparents, I believe, were around, but they were young. This was way back when. So, Chad, why don't you tell us about the history of 1946 and kind of paint the picture of where the world was at? Because maybe, just maybe, a lot of these films have a lot to do with the history of the time, especially what we've been kind of coming off of. If you get what I'm picking up, if you're picking up what I'm putting down, you know.
A little bit. I tried to keep it a little bit light here with the history, but yeah, my grandparents are probably around 13. My parents are born in like the 60s, and then I was born in the 90s. So we were both born in the 90s. So here's the history. It's just a little bit. The exact distance between the Earth and the moon is measured. An early electronic computer is unveiled at the University of Pennsylvania. Interpol is refounded, I guess. It got lost, or they found it again. The bikini is first modeled in Paris. You're welcome. At Club.
So I guess I was the second person to model the bikini in Paris.
At Club 500 in Atlantic City, Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin staged their first comedy show together.
Very cool.
Santa Claus Land opens to the public in Santa Claus, Indiana.
Wow.
Less fun. The Nuremberg trials happened.
Which, if you haven't checked out our 1961 episode of Picture This, we covered The Judgment at Nuremberg, which is a film that actually won our prize for Best Picture that year, upsetting West Side Story and The Hustler. So go check that one out.
And again, I'm sorry, Dylan.
No, hey, no. I mean, it's consensus. It must have been number one because I must have had it high enough. So
True.
I mean, that's how our show works. It's a consensus.
Proposed United States purchase of Greenland from Denmark. I'm going to say that didn't actually happen. The Casio company is founded. I think they make watches. And Harry S. Truman proclaims the end of World War II.
Yep, and I mean, that's a big one, World War II. We're coming off the heels of it. It's going to be very interesting to talk about some of these films because some of these are so raw, fresh off of the war. You feel, I love the Christmas sweaters. Yeah, so this is a pseudo Christmas and war special, I guess. Two things that don't really coincide well with one another. But yeah, war has a big deal to play in these films, especially two of them quite directly are about war in one way or another. So I'm excited to talk about that. Actually, three of them are about war. I didn't even think of that. Three of them are about war. Even though one was written decades or centuries before war even happened. Anyway, we'll get there. Lots of cool things happened. A lot of cool people are born, I'm assuming, right, Chad? You want to tell us about some people who were born, maybe some people who died, and maybe some people who made some music that made some albums.
Oh yeah, there's I have a lot more births than deaths, but I have both. And some recognizable names. Diane Keaton, Syd Barrett of Pink Floyd fame, Robert Krieger of The Doors fame, Dolly Parton, David Lynch, one of my favorites. Gene Siskel, Blake Clark, Alan Rickman, the great Alan Rickman. David Gilmour, of Pink Floyd fame. Frank Welker of Scooby-Doo fame. Liza Minnelli, Timothy Dalton, Tim Curry, John Waters, Robert Fripp of King Crimson fame. Reggie Jackson, Andre the Giant, Cher, Brian Cox, Donald Trump, sorry. George W. Bush, sorry. Cheech Marin, Danny Glover, Bill Clinton, Connie Chung, Freddie Mercury, Dennis Dugan, Tommy Lee Jones, Charles Dance, Howard Shore, Ivan Reitman, Sally Field, aka Mrs. Gump, the great Steven Spielberg, Dick Wolf, Edgar Winter, and Patti Smith. For
That's
death,
actually, I was going to say, it's pretty interesting. 3 presidents born in 1946, and they served terms they had a whole
yeah,
person serve terms between them. Actually, no, Bill Clinton and George W. Bush were back to back, but it's kind of interesting that they're all the same exact age. And,
right.
well, not same exact age, probably not born the same day. And we're actually recording this on the day of Steven Spielberg's birthday. So happy birthday, Steven Spielberg.
Happy birthday.
We're covering your birthday, December 18th of 1946. You must have been born. So, congratulations, I guess. Even though this is airing a few days after, but
we'll have to get to another Spielberg film soon.
Yeah,
and picture
I believe
this.
we will be, assuming he gets in on this year of 2022. Assuming, we will be covering him in April, most likely.
Right,
It would be a huge snub if not. We'll talk about it when we get there. But yeah,
agree. All right, here's some deaths. Jackie the MGM Lion. Anyone? Speaking of movies, Jack Johnson, the boxer, Gertrude Stein, H.G. Wells, and a bunch of Nazis after the Nuremberg trials.
Yeah. Poor lion.
Yeah, it's a cute lion. Albums: The Voice of Frank Sinatra by Frank Sinatra, Louis Jordan and his Timpani 5 by Louis Jordan and his Timpani 5, Calypso by Lord Invader and Lord Beginner with Felix and his Internationals.
No relation to Lord Vader, right? Like Darth Vader?
Maybe. Distant cousin. Drummond with Krupa by Gene Krupa and his orchestra. Ink Spots by the Ink Spots. Schubert, Symphony No. 9 in C major, The Great by Bruno Walter / the New York Philharmonic. Tenor Sax by Ike Quebec. Spirituals by Paul Robeson. Negro Folk Songs by Leadbelly, and Tenor Sax by John Hardy.
Love it.
Those were the times.
Yeah, where you just like pick up an album and it's just like this guy playing tenor saxophone. I love
there
that.
You go.
Yeah, I was a saxophone player, so I probably listened to him. Maybe I don't know. All right, so talking about the actual ceremony. Before the ceremony, there were some movies that didn't get nominated. They were snubbed. Yeah, maybe they were snubbed. One that was notably snubbed and probably wasn't up for any consideration for Best Picture. Maybe it was up for Best Song. I'll have to check. Song of the South, a very detrimental film to cinema history, but I have seen it, and I did grow up watching it a few times, watching the good parts, the cute little animal parts, not the really racist parts. Rode the ride in Disney World, loved it until I realized, what was going on, and I still love the ride, like the thrill of it. It's just the theming is very much dated, but a very interesting artifact. And Disney Plus, I think it's better to show what you have and put a disclaimer on it than to hide it forever. That's how we learn. We do not learn by just shoving things away. You have to see it to learn from it so it doesn't happen again. But that's the only really notable film I saw that I had seen. No other real films that I had seen. I know Notorious came out that year. Decoy, The Killers, Stairway to Heaven, and then of course the original French Beauty and the Beast, La Belle et la Bête, which some people consider to be the best French film of all time. I've seen bits and pieces of it, not the entire thing, but it is phenomenal. So I guess that would be the snub, I would say. But again, they weren't ready to nominate an international film yet. But yeah, I didn't have too many. Did you have any, Chad?
I just had a couple. You named some of them. The Big Sleep, Black Beauty, Great Expectations, Notorious. I haven't seen any of those. I also haven't seen Song of the South, but I have seen, and we talked about this recently on my channel, Make Mine Music, I think.
Make Mine Music came out.
Yeah.
Yep, probably. Yep. I just probably didn't deep dive enough into the research. But yeah, Make Mine Music came out. And not terrible. It's got some good shorts in there, some bad shorts, some middle of the road. But the Oscar ceremony itself, we get there, and again, another really boring graphic because Critics' Choice doesn't exist yet, PGA doesn't exist yet, and this was the first year of the BAFTA. And at that point, they didn't nominate anything; they just gave out their winners. So it says that all those things were snubbed. It's because they didn't nominate anything; they just gave out the winner. Same with Golden Globes; they just gave out the winner. So it says snub, but it was really just that Best Years of Our Lives got the Best Picture prize, and that was it. There was no nominations. It was just like, we're the BAFTAs. Welcome to Britain. Here's our best film of the year, the Best Years of Our Lives. So again, very, very uneventful precursors there. I mean, Best Years of Our Lives was the favorite going into it. Obviously, it was the best, not just the best picture in terms of critic response that year, but it was the highest grossing film of that year. It grossed a shoot ton of money at that time. Not as much as like Gone with the Wind had in the 30s, but like it had gotten a lot of money. It was the favorite. And the only other one to even crack the top 10 was Razor's Edge, which is pretty interesting considering I'd say of the five, the most popular one is the one that we're, picking this show for, the It's a Wonderful Life, but we'll talk about it when we get there. It wasn't a hit when it first came out, which is very interesting. That's just how history works. But what is so interesting about the Best Years of Our Lives is that it makes Oscar history. It's the first time ever that an actor won 2 Oscars for the same performance. And that is because Harold Russell won Best Supporting Actor for his part in the film. He was nominated and won, but the Academy, without even knowing that they were going to give him the award, had already planned to give him an honorary Oscar because of his disability, because he was able to do the performance with the hook hands and all that stuff as like a way to honor the veterans and honor someone who had come from the war and who was in a picture. It was like this inspirational thing. They gave him an honorary Oscar, and they also gave Laurence Olivier an honorary Oscar for Henry V. But it's very interesting that he happened to get an honorary Oscar and win a real Oscar at the same time for the same role. So it'll never happen again, I don't think, unless you never know. Like maybe who I'm trying to think of the front runners this year. Maybe Brendan Fraser is going to save the world or something, and they're going to give him an honorary Oscar, and then he's going to happen to win also for the same role or something. Like maybe it'll happen again someday, but I doubt it. So that's just a really cool Oscar trivia fact that Harold Russell won 2 awards for the Best Years of Our Lives in the same night for the same role, which is really interesting. And we'll talk about him later. I think he's great. So definitely were deserved. And this is the second time that they had 5 nominations. As we know, or they went back to 5 nominations. They had been nominating 10, 12 for a long time. And then in 1945, they went back to, or 1944, they went back to 5 nominations because we covered that year with Double Indemnity and Gaslight. And then this was, I believe, the, maybe it was the third time then that there were 5 nominees. Anyway, there were 5 nominees, which was not a mainstay at the time. Otherwise, don't really have a lot to say about the award ceremony. I mean, the Harold Russell thing was the only interesting thing. Yeah, 2 Oscars in one night. Pretty crazy. So why don't we get into it, Chad? Why don't we get it right to it with the Best Years of Our Lives? That's a good segue, considering we just talked about Harold Russell. Chad, tell us about the best years, not of your life, but of our lives, this particular film.
Best years of my life was when I'm doing Picture This, apparently.
Oh, thanks.
The Best Years of Our Lives, directed by William Wyler, written by Robert E. Sherwood, cinematography by Greg Toland, music by Hugo Friedhofer and Emil Newman, starring Myrna Loy, Frederick March, Dana Andrews, Teresa Wright, Virginia Mayo, and Harold Russell. Synopsis: 3 World War II veterans come home and try to readjust to society, based on Glory for Me by McKinley Cantor.
Yeah. So, again, we talked about it. Coming right off the war, this was literally as fresh, hot off the, like, right off the oven, I guess, like, if you want to make a metaphor, like, right out of the oven, as hot as it gets in terms of relevancy and, like, urgency, like to make a movie right after the war. And I just think that's just so interesting, separated from the history, but even with the history added onto it, thinking about it in the context of that time, like how interesting this must have been for a moviegoer to see this as they were living it. Like this is almost it kind of makes me feel like kind of what Nomadland was, where it's like, it feels like a documentary because it's so real. Like, yeah, it's still scripted. Yeah, there's real life. There's fictional parts of it, but it's mostly these real life nomads. Like it's capturing the history of today at the time it's happening. And that's what this kind of gave me the vibe of like, yeah, it's a fictional thing, it's scripted, but it's like real veterans in the roles, as I just talked about. Harold Russell, who lost his hands at war, came back with hooks and wanted to act and was in this film, and
Wow.
they made that a part of it. And then like just seeing it just so raw, like all the emotions, even if the other actors, I don't know if they necessarily went to war as well, but you could definitely tell the whole world was in that state of like, oh, we just came off of something really devastating and big, and people are coming home, and it's tough to reassimilate. And I think it's really interesting to see that some movies made at the time were more about the war itself, whereas this movie is more about the aftermath and things that essentially really matter. You know, like the stuff that actually matters, which is the mental trauma and the processing of what happened, and getting back home, and getting to live the best years of your lives, which is very interesting. But Chad, had you seen this one before?
No. Nope.
Oh, interesting, cool. So Chad, what did you think of this one, the best years of our lives? It is a long one, but were you into it?
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, maybe it was a little too long, like for like what it actually was. Like, I think you could have gotten the same points across, the same stuff. I mean, I think the most interesting part was the soldier with the hook hands, and honestly, I didn't know the fact that those were real. I
Yeah.
thought that was. I was like, how'd they pull that off?
Right.
Okay, it was real. So that's pretty sad. Is of pretty much most, I argue war is always bad, but
Mm,
if you have to fight in a war, a one against Hitler is one to fight in.
mm, yeah.
So that is what that is. I enjoyed the parts with that character with the disability,
Mhm,
because yeah, it's interesting to see like all these soldiers trying to like readjust to normal life, having trouble finding like a job, um, and trying to go in and be like, well, I don't have like specific skills about what you want me to do, but I know how to like, fly a plane or drop bombs, and so I can
mhm.
apply some of that to what you need me to do. And
Right. It's
I,
like they really can't bring any of their expertise in the real world because
right.
it's so otherworldly. Like war at the time was just so its own thing, and that's all they kind of knew because they were so young when they got into the war that now they come
Yeah.
out and they don't know how to navigate. It's like almost like it's more comfortable to be back in the war essentially for some of them. I mean, I
Yeah.
love the scene with what's his name, Fred Derry's character, where he's sitting he goes and sits in the plane cockpit and just like sits
Mhm.
there. It's such a haunting image because there's a terrifying nature of like this was me, like I was there, like how the hell did I survive this? But also like the almost the comfort he finds. It's like almost like a darkness too. Like it's kind of morbid in a way that like he finds comfort in that, but also like then he kind of comes to terms with it, and he resents it. And
Mhm.
yeah, I really love seeing the paths of all three of these characters because they do have such different stories and they're such different ages. You know, one was just
Yeah.
married, which is the character I just mentioned, and he comes home to a wife who has moved on. She's like, I'm seeing this other guy now. Like, I didn't want to wait for you. And honestly, that makes sense. I mean, you don't know if this guy's ever going to come from home from war. You'd like to think you'd be loyal, but it can only take so much of just never hearing from this person. You know, it must be scary. And the parents also who just don't understand the depths of what he went through because they didn't have
Yeah.
TVs. You know, they didn't have all they had was word of mouth to know what they were facing over there. They couldn't see with their own eyes except for what they had seen from propaganda. So then you also have the other character, obviously, with the disability, and his whole story is that he wants to be normal, but everyone else sees him as this like thing that needs to be protected or needs
Yeah.
to be helped, and he doesn't feel that way. To where he's like, this is my life, and I've adjusted. And like, I think the most powerful moment with his story is when he has his girlfriend because he's in a relationship. He's not married, but he
Wilma.
loves this girl. Yes, and he's like, you want to come upstairs and like, I just watch me, watch what I do, and he undresses in front of her, and I think that's where he earns her respect too. And then the other third story, which was Frederick Mark's character, he also won the Oscar for this. He's older when he goes into the war, so he's already got a family and kids. Like he's got children, so that's a whole other perspective being someone older, and he goes right to alcoholism, and that's a very interesting storyline too. So you got three completely different stories. One
Yeah.
who's kind of fine. He's fine. Just everyone else thinks he's a problem or needs to be fixed. You've got a guy who just doesn't know what to do because his wife has left him, and he's now has to find a job, like you said, and he's like trying all these little odd jobs as like a cashier at this like store or whatever, at this
Mhm.
little candy shop. And then you have the guy who should have his life together, but he's so mentally distraught that he turns to alcoholism. So it's such an interesting way of seeing three different stories, but they all somehow intertwine because you do see them originally come home together. So you kind of get that little connection. You see them meet up at the bar at times. So like they still find a way to interconnect it. And of course, the one captain falls in love with the guy's daughter, and there's like a little bit of a love triangle in there just to kind of interweave it. But I almost look at this as more of an anthology because it is so separate. Like every story is its own thing. And I think for me personally, that's why I'm able to like enjoy it more in terms of the length. Like this one breezed by for me. This is the second time I saw it. The first time was for a movie club we're in, and I breezed by it then, and I breezed past it now. I was like, I can't believe this is already over. I think it's because it felt like three movies. It was just like every time I would pause another movie and watch the next one, and pause another movie and watch the next one. They were all thematically linked, but I was like, I'm watching three different movies, so it almost felt like 3 hour long shorts rather than 1 3 hour movie, which was kind of cool. But yeah, I was really into just the different perspectives and the fact that they didn't really dwell on the glory of the fighting and all that stuff. They really made it honest to like the emotional side of things and like wanting to actually get down to like what actually matters. Like I said, like the bonds and the people that you leave behind that you come back to, and readjusting to life, because that's what it is. Like this is now your life, and this is how it has to be. That's a thing of the past. And I think that's very interesting because a lot of war films, I feel like, tend to almost glorify the violence a little bit, or have these big epic battle scenes, and that serves a purpose too as like an anti-war statement. But I think it's almost more striking to me. It makes a bigger anti-war statement to show like, look how bad it is when you come back. Like, look how much you're losing in your life. It almost connects a little bit to It's a Wonderful Life, which we'll talk about later. But like, look at all the stuff that like what do you value in your life, what's important in your life, and I think that's what this really hits home for me. Like this was, I think, as much of an anti-war film as like Saving Private Ryan is, and it's a totally different breed, but I think it's anti-war in the way it shows that like it's tough, not before the war or during, but especially after. Like that is sometimes the toughest part of all. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and it's just interesting to see like when people get kind of like institutionalized, like you said, like from a young age, they get in there and then they come home and then they just don't really know what to do. And they're kind of jaded a little bit, which also goes to another movie we'll talk about.
Yeah, there's a lot of interconnectivity in the slate. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it kind of reminds me a lot of like Prisoners. I guess in a way they're in their own prison, but like you look at like another picture this winter, the Shawshank Redemption, when like Brooks, he wants so hard to just stay in the prison because that's all he knows. And that's kind of like the same thing as maybe war is their prison. It is kind of really cool. And yeah, I really liked, seeing the Homer trying to learn how to play the piano and stuff like that. Like his tenacity to be like, well, just because I have, these hooks for hands doesn't mean that I can't still try to learn how to do things that I love. And we've seen people who have lost limbs and stuff like that run marathons and do these great things, even though people might kind of undervalue them and be like, oh, they'll never be able to do this. And it's like, well, maybe I can in some way.
Yeah, for sure.
And it is interesting, kind of like from a psychological standpoint, to see Homer come back and just, be so self-conscious about it. But it's just like, not the fact that, people are necessarily staring, but it's like the fact that people were limiting themselves. They're like, oh, I don't want to boast that I have these hands. So I'm just going to not do things with my hands. And he's like, I wish people wouldn't do that.
Yeah, and there's almost a brave nature of the actor too to be vulnerable to this, because this must be still very mentally tough for them to process as people, and then having to play essentially a fictionalized version of what you're going through, your own experience, is probably tough. I mean, the fact that he puts his all into this role and has to bring all that vulnerability, it's quite powerful, I think, to watch him do that, because he is, I think, of all three of them, like you kind of said, like not the most funny, but like he's kind of the more lighthearted one. He's kind of got a more positive outlook. He's like, no, like I'm back home, I'm happy, I want to like be with you all, and like there's a sorrow, but like the other guys, I think, go through darker shit. His just a more of a physical thing. So, and I agree with you. Like the hooks, playing the piano it was kind of cute. It's kind of funny. Like I think this has good bits of humor too, because again, they are people. Like you want them to kind of get back to the way things were, and that's why at first, when I first watched this, I was like, it's such like a corny happy ending. It's the classic like MGM ending, but I think you kind of need that, especially in the time it came out, like to show that life goes on in a good way, in a positive way, and like it doesn't end the way Brooks ended in Shawshank, where it is sad and sorrowful and there's no hope. You
Yeah.
could have easily made one of the three guys like have that moment, and that would have been heartbreaking. But I almost kind of like how they all get a happy ending. Like the other guy finds a new wife, and the father, is doing better and doesn't want to do alcoholism. Homer, a girl, he gets married to her too, I think. And yeah, they like connect again, and like everything feels normal at the end, and that's kind of a nice way to end it, especially at such dark times. Is probably a really uplifting movie, and that's why it grossed so much money. That's why it was such a smash hit, and why so many people consider it one of the best films ever made, because it is such a hopeful piece, but doesn't shy away from the darkness either. Like balances those tones so well, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of kind of like the darkness and a little bit of the lightness too, there are two scenes that I kind of wanted to like talk about real quick. Is one of the scenes that I really liked was the moments with Homer and Wilma where like she's just kind of helping him. But, like you said, like, he's just showing her like things he has to do to adjust and stuff like that. And I just thought that was a really nice moment between them. Because it's just, I don't know, it's just so sweet when you see like a thing where a couple is just helping each other, and I just love stuff like that. Like it's like
just like everyday life,
like
like
romance is like Say Anything and stuff like that, where you see like the two people who are romantically involved like just lifting each other up and helping each other. I thought that was very sweet.
And I love the final shot there where he's tucked into bed and he kind of like a tear rolls down his face,
Yeah.
and it's a happy tear because he's like she's staying, she's here, I got her, like, and she respects me, she didn't run away, and that's such a cathartic thing too. And yeah, the tear might be fake because it's old Hollywood, it might have been a fake tear, but
His
like
Oscar
I also
moment.
I think it's so beautiful. I'm like, wow, like that really touches me, and I cry when I watch that scene too, because I'm like, wow, like yeah, more dramatic film, a more unrealistic film may have had a girl like run away in fear, and then like the whole final act is him trying to get her back. But here it's just like they're in a moment of understanding, like you said, they're helping one another, and then she just like leaves, tucks him in, and he cries, and it's like, oh, it's so cute, so heartwarming.
Yeah, and then you also have the scene that is a little bit darker, and I was kind of conflicted on this one because I know it. So it's a scene in the diner, the candy shop. You said when like this one guy shares like an opinion, and he gets yelled at and attacked. And I know it's kind of like a whole, I don't know, like a PTSD type of thing, maybe, or like a triggering thing because he was insulting people who went to war and saying like, oh, you're fighting for the wrong side, or I don't know, some bullshit comment that's dumb that you would hear every day now on like Twitter or something like that. If you're like a service person and someone said something really dumb about your service or something like that. But for me, they go and they like attack this man and they like slam him down into like this like glass thing. And I'm like, they took this comment that he made and they ended up assaulting him, and then like no one gets like any repercussions for this. And I'm almost
he gets fired. He does get fired.
Okay, that's true. But I'm almost like saying, is the movie saying don't support the troops and don't is it like a propaganda type of thing there?
Well, no, that's tough too, because it's like, you lost the quote I wrote down. You lost your arms fighting the wrong enemy, type thing.
Which is fucked up.
Which is a fucked up thing to say. Yeah, I think it's just kind of that idea of like everyone's still kind of on edge, and like this film doesn't really dive into like the horrors too much, but those moments, one little thing can trigger someone, and I guess like I've never lived in those shoes, I don't know, but like I felt like that was a more realistic moment. Like I could see someone like just getting ticked off at something and just having an outburst, and it happens with everyone, but I do agree it was a little extreme, but it was an interesting moment, and I think that also is another one where you can kind of have the characters interact again. Because, like I said, they are such separate stories that this kind of gives Homer and Fred another moment to
Yeah.
interact, to make sure you're reminded that like these are all three like the main characters interacting together. I don't know, but that's an interesting scene too. Like it's interesting to see just all the different levels, like the extremities of how someone deals with like PTSD. In this case, like punching someone in the face for a comment versus like, you know, having a more personal moment and crying a single tear, letting it run down the cheek. You know, it's very interesting to see just like the difference there. But yeah, it's full of such great moments like that,
Very
and just
good film.
the whole first hour is them all just like coming home. Like that's all the first hour is. But
Yeah.
I kind of love that, how each one they drive up to the house and like the other guys are waiting for the other guy to get in, not because they're like out of respect being like, oh no, wait till he gets inside. It's out of fear of like, I don't want to go now, like I'm nervous, I want to let's stay here a minute before we drive to the next place, because there's almost like a fear of like, oh, what if things are different, what if things aren't ready, what if things are changed. And like each one, as they drop each one off at their houses, like kind of the anticipation of that is really nice. And those moments, I mean, like as much as I'm an anti-war person, whenever I see a soldier come home, like those videos, it always makes me emotional, because I think that to me is nothing is the beauty of war, but it's the only beautiful thing to come from war, is that it really, I think if you've been to war, that really makes you think about what's important in life. And that's what this film I think is about, like just valuing what's important in life. And to see soldiers then come home and embrace their families, like it's almost like that realization on their faces that like this is what matters, this is what, you know, what I need to be doing and where I need to be. And I feel like a lot of soldiers will see that and relate to this and be like, no, yeah, like even if you wanted to go to war, like you'd always rather be with your family, because that's what matters. And it makes me emotional, because you know there's so many people who go to war that don't want to, or at least in certain wars where they weren't they didn't choose, you know, the draft and stuff in Vietnam. Like it's so sad that some people don't even have the choice and then go. Yeah, so to see like them come home to their families, like I can imagine how cathartic that is, even if you wanted to go to war, just coming back and seeing all the things you left behind and seeing them back. I mean, even if in a non-war context, like I think of Survivor, my favorite TV show, right? Like they go on an island for 39 days to compete for $1 million. But that's 39 days without your family. And I think personally, like 39 days doesn't seem like a long time, but when you don't have a cell phone, you can't even like talk to them or text them. Like 39 days, it's a month and a half. It's a long time to not see your family, or a month and a week. So like, I can feel that when I see like coming home videos, or people coming back to their families, or even if you are texting them or calling them every day, but to see someone in person. I think of COVID as well. Like the first time you hugged your friend after COVID, having not seen them for a year and a half, maybe, like how that can be for someone. Like it's moments like those that are so honest and so real that this movie I think does really well, or moments like that. So I think it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Cool. So the best years of our lives was it had one of the best Oscar wins of their lives. It won 7 out of 8 Oscars it was nominated for. I mean, this swept the Oscars. This was the #1 box office. Like this was the film of the year, essentially. The only one it didn't win was sound recording, which isn't even a category anymore. The 7 it did win, though, it wins Best Picture. It wins Best Director for William Wyler. It wins Best Actor for Frederick March, the dad who becomes an alcoholic. Best Supporting Actor, as we said, for Harold Russell, who also wins an honorary Oscar, but wins Best Adapted Screenplay, wins Best Scoring, Dramatic or Comedic Picture, and Best Film Editing. So again, like it wins almost everything it possibly can, which is pretty cool. It won 7 awards, not 5. You know, it was not a nomination. I don't know. I'm trying to segue 5 to 5th, but it didn't really work. Speaking of war, though, Henry V. Let's talk about Henry V, Chad.
All right, Henry V. Directed by Laurence Olivier. Written by Dallas Bauer, Alan Dent, and Laurence Olivier. Cinematography by Jack Hildyard and Robert Krasker. Music by William Walton. Starring Laurence Olivier, Renee Asherson, Robert Newton, and Leslie Banks. Synopsis: King Henry fights a battle in the Shakespeare adaptation based on Henry V. by William Shakespeare.
That's right, Henry V. The actual title on the screen is so long. That's why we're not even going to say it in the slate. But it's
Oh,
the chronicle history of King Henry V with his battle fought at Agincourt in France. That's like the first title card that appears. It's a dumb long title. I know I made fun of Precious based on the book Pushed by Sapphire, but I'm not going to go there this time. We're going to call it Henry V. Let's shorten it down. I'm growing. It's the holiday season. I'll be kind. Yeah. So this is Shakespeare. I mean, like it's one of those things where it's like, you're either a Shakespeare person or you're not, I feel. And like sometimes people come around to Shakespeare. I think once you're in though, it's like cool. Like once you like Shakespeare, once you like kind of absorb Shakespeare, I feel like you can go so many different avenues, but especially for like a first time watcher, someone who might not know as many Shakespeare stuff. Like I know you're fairly familiar with some Shakespeare, but not super familiar, Chad. But had you read Henry V? Had you seen a version of this?
no.
No. Yeah. So let me know, Chad. I'm interested to find out your experience as someone who has mentioned to me in the past, at least, because we never talked about Shakespeare here except for West Side Story,
Right.
and oh, we didn't talk about the Lion King on here, but we have talked about the
Mhm.
Lion King on your channel. But
Yeah.
um, this is the first actual Shakespeare that we've covered on this show. So, what are your thoughts?
Not a lot.
Okay.
It's one of those where because when the Coen Brothers Macbeth came out,
Hmm.
and we watched that, I remember that's when I learned that you were really into Shakespeare,
Right.
because of like literature and plays and stuff. Um, and I just I've never really gotten into it. Like I read it in school sometimes, but I mean high school, so I barely read
Mhm.
it and barely understood it, and I'm still there. Like
Mhm.
I want to get into Shakespeare, but I haven't taken the time and the effort to actually read through the plays, or the dummy books to figure out what it's actually saying.
Mhm.
So I tried to pay attention to this and really get into it, but I couldn't with the way they were talking.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happened. I know
Okay.
there was some comedy in the first bit with
Yeah.
someone was doing a speech
Which
and they
is
were
which is completely new because obviously or not obviously, but Shakespeare, a little crash course, I guess. Shakespeare, it's either your tragedy or comedy. Like it was
right.
very little of merging the two. Like the tragedies were tragic, comedies were comedic. But what I like about this version, because this does take a lot of interesting liberties, it does have a little bit of comedy in that beginning. That is not really present.
Mm,
And typically in a Shakespeare play, you have like the chorus, and they're the ones who kind of like tell you about the area and the land and all the politics and what's going on and the setting, like setting the scene, kind of like what we do at the beginning of this show, like talking about the year and stuff. Like they do that. They kind of like set the stage of what's going on in England and in France and what's the background. And that's always the hardest part for any Shakespeare film, I feel like, to get across is the chorus. Cause like you can't just have a group of people standing there telling you exposition. Like
mhm.
you can't do that in a movie. And that's what makes Shakespeare so hard to translate to film. And I think that's why a lot of film adaptations of Shakespeare don't always get it right, is because they want to just try to like immerse you in the setting and drop you right into it. But what I like about this version is that it opens at the Globe in England. Like it actually opens with a theater play, and you have this guy who is the chorus coming out and explaining the politics of England and France, and um, kind of just stating what's going on. And then of course you have the other guys coming in, and you've got them fumbling over the page of
Yeah.
paper and like, oh, they keep losing their cue cards almost, which is kind of fun because like the best thing about a film adaptation of Shakespeare, or really any stage production versus reading it just as its own book, is that like even if you don't get all the words, you can sometimes tell just from the body language and the setting and how they're acting what they're trying to say, or at least what the tone is supposed to be. So, like, I like this moment because it was like you can obviously tell they're trying to say something important, but they keep fumbling the lines. I think that's a really fun choice, and it kind of brings the audience in. It's a much easier way of just bringing you in than just dropping you in the middle of like a throne room with King Henry on the throne saying like, oh, the French, they insulted me, I'm gonna attack them. Because that's how this whole thing stems, is he gets a gift from France, he opens the gift and it's a bunch of tennis balls. He thinks it's gonna be like gold or money, and it's full of tennis balls, and he's like, ugh, I'm gonna attack the French. They don't dare insult me? And I think that's interesting, is that they don't like just start with that and just dive into the war. They, go through like trying to make it feel like a play and kind of bring you in and say like, oh, we're putting on a show. And then as the movie goes on, it kind of expands past the globe and becomes like its own thing. Like it becomes an actual film, which I think is a really cool choice. As someone who's a fan of the play, I mean, my problem with this film is that I just don't love the play that much. Like I think of all Shakespeare's plays, like this wouldn't even be in my top 10, maybe even my top 20. Like this is not even bottom
He
tier,
has
but
20 of them?
oh,
Okay.
no, he has a lot, but yeah, this is not even in my like top 20 Shakespeare plays, but I still admire it. I've read it a bunch of times, maybe like 5 or 6 times in school and stuff. When I was studying it, I watched the Kenneth Branagh version, which is a much more dark version. It's much more like war and like France and
Mm,
England, because that's basically what the premise is. It's King Henry leading his troops against France and conquering France, and then he gets the French girl, and then he marries her, and all is good. Everything's forgiven. He now rules, but he's like, sorry, France, like we're good now, right? And that's kind of it. And then you find out he has a kid, and then he dies, and then his kid becomes Henry VI, and that's really it. Like that's the basic premise. There's not a lot to it. It's a very
mhm.
straightforward depiction of history. But what I think is interesting here is also that Winston Churchill, who was obviously the leader of England during the time, not Gary Oldman, like the actual Winston Churchill, he was the one who like said that he was like, I want you to make Henry V. This was during the war in 1944. He said, I want you to make a film of Henry V to boost morale for
Yeah.
England,
Mhm.
to like make this a propaganda film, not a negative propaganda film. Like it's still, it doesn't try to like bend history, but it's to make this like unified British spirit of like hoorah for England when they were fighting the in the war, to fight the enemies and stuff like that. So this is actually released in 1944 in England, but it wasn't released until the United States until 46. So that's why it's in the 46 Oscars,
Gotcha.
not the
Okay.
44. But I think this is very interesting because the Henry V, when you read it, it's like it's either it's very loosely interpretation. It's loosely interpretable in the sense that like some people see it as like this kind of morale boost, like Henry's a great leader, but some people view it in the lens of he's almost too power hungry and he almost lets his ego get in the way of himself. And that's why I really like that scene where he goes in disguise and sneaks amongst the troops to hear what the troops actually have to say about him. He's like in disguise and the troops are just talking about Henry, and he's listening as this disguised person, like listening to the troops talk about Henry. I think that scene's actually my favorite because it's like he's actually getting to find out what people think of him, and because they would never tell the king what they really think. He has to go undercover. It'd be like if Elon Musk dressed up as it's like undercover boss. It's like if Elon Musk dressed up as a worker and went around Twitter headquarters and was like, "What do you think of this new Elon Musk guy?" It's very different, but when he disguises himself amongst the troops, I think that's a very interesting um, scene. But yeah, it's kind of loose for interpretation. Some people have taken it as like a pro-war thing. Some people have taken it as an anti-war thing. But this film, I think, because of what Winston Churchill wanted, is very much more pro-war. Like we're gonna win, and we're gonna have this morale. We're gonna have these troops. We're gonna do the thing and get the glory. And I think that's something that Branagh's version does better. It kind of gets it back to the work of like the ambiguity of like it's kind of you're up to your own interpretation of what you think. It's more of just like laying out the facts and you make up your mind how to feel about it, whereas here it's like very much telling you how to feel about it. But yeah, it's very interesting because it is historically accurate. Like this is a real thing. This is a real ruler. So it's also interesting to see what's different from history, what's not. But yeah, I think it's interesting seeing it as a piece of British propaganda. I mean, it's hard to judge it because it's solely existing for that purpose. But as an adaptation, I think it's a good adaptation. I think it's very beautiful to look at too. Like I think the actual use of Technicolor is really cool. The battle sequences look really nice. The scene where he is kind of lurking around camp in disguise is really well lit and well shot. And I do like the design of having the Globe Theater and then expanding out to the real world. And just the use of that is just an interesting way to make it different, even though it is just Henry V. But yeah, I think you hit it on the head. It's like if you're just not that big of a Shakespeare person, like this is probably going to do nothing for you, which is tough because, like they don't have like the subtitles to like say like what the language actually means because
Yeah.
like yeah, it's not really a foreign language, even though at this point it kind of is. It's like Old English it may as well be its own language,
Right. And I think that's just kind of like the problem for the film. Like, just to have that kind of barrier, Like, you have to be like a study of William Shakespeare to really understand what's going on in this, or to really get into this. And it's not even just that, but like, look, I could actually enjoy Macbeth, even though they did a similar thing,
Mhm.
because they actually like, it seemed like they cared about like cinematography and
Talking about
making
the
things,
Coen Brothers one, right?
yeah,
Or the
yes, and making things creepy and actually having like really good performances. And this, it to me, it just felt like a bunch of obvious sets, and
hmm,
I just could never really get into, like, I mean, so does The Wizard of Oz, but I could still get into that,
right.
for the most part, because, it's just a really good story and songs and stuff like that.
Mhm,
And also finding out that this is like kind of, British propaganda, and I'm not saying that's like terrible or they
mhm,
shouldn't do that, but like I'm not like a nationalist and I don't understand the whole yeah, Britain kind of thing.
mhm,
I'm like, why is that a best picture here? We're not Britain. Like what?
right.
I don't know. It just didn't really work for me at all.
That's
And
fine,
I
yeah.
feel like that's one of maybe like the few that have been in our thing that I just like don't care about it at all.
That's fine. And
And
again, like
yeah.
I'd be interested if maybe then you do watch the Branagh version and maybe that one illustrates the story a little bit better than going
Maybe
back to this if it will be any better. I don't know. Because
that would
Laurence
be an
Olivier,
interesting project.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I think what Laurence Olivier is doing performance wise is also really good. Like just knowing, even if you don't really know the story, I mean, like he's doing these speeches really well. He's got this just, I mean, he's got such a gravitas as an actor. There's a reason why the Tony Award in England is called the Laurence Olivier Award,
Oh.
because he is just amazing and he was one of the best British actors, stage and screen. But I also find it interesting that he directs this too because I do agree. I think the direction here is interesting. I think it's helped by the fact that it's in color and you can use the color.
Mhm.
If this was black and white, I think it'd be a lot less interesting. I think the best choice is starting at the Globe Theater and making it a theater piece and then making it more of a film as it goes along. I think that's an
Mm.
interesting choice. But I think that's more of a screenplay thing than a direction thing. Like I think it was written to be that way. So I don't really give him the credit for that as much as I do the other writers. Because I don't think he originally wanted to direct this either. I think he wanted to be in it, and I think he told Winston Churchill and other people in the studios that he was like, I want control in the fact that like his last experience, As You Like It, the other Shakespeare that he did, he was like, I had a terrible time. I had a terrible experience, so I want to make sure that like this is a better experience for me because like that was a shit show. And so they were like, yeah, no, you can hire whoever you want. And Lawrence Olivier was like, great. And he asked all the directors, and all of them were busy. So he was like, I guess I'll do it myself. And he made himself the director. So he didn't even want to be the director here. And
Mm.
I think that also kind of hurts sometimes when an actor just wants to act instead of direct, and he kind of has to do both. Whereas like Kenneth Branagh is like, no, I want to direct and act, and I'm gonna do both really well. So I think it just comes from a place of passion where like how much of this did he actually care about direction wise. It's very clear he's much more invested in the performance than he is the direction. But even then, I mean, like I said earlier, like this is not one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. Like this could be the best adaptation of Henry V. I still like the Branagh version better, but like this could be the best adaptation of Henry V ever. But even then, because I don't really like Henry V that much, I really don't care. Like you said, like, but
Oh,
I still think it's a
like,
good adaptation. I still think me loving Shakespeare still puts it ahead of some other films, just because I'm like, I still just love the language. I love the nature and the atmosphere and the vibes. Like, even if it's my least favorite story of his, like, I still will eat it all up because I like it. But it's also like I get it. Like, it's definitely not for everyone, and especially this version. I mean, the older you get, I feel like the more conventional it is, and the more alienating it can be. But who knows? Maybe the Coen brothers will take a whack at this someday. Who knows? But Henry V is nominated for 4 Oscars and doesn't win any. It's nominated for Best Picture, Best Actor for Laurence Olivier, Best Scoring of a Dramatic or Comedic Picture, and Best Art Direction Color, because back then there was art direction for black and white and for color. Speaking of black and white and color, there's a version of a movie out there that exists in color that I accidentally turned on today when I was watching it, and I had to go, "Oh no!" And I changed it to black and white. It was the biggest jump scare of 2022 thus far, and that is the Christmas classic that we all came here to talk about, and that is "It's a Wonderful Life." Chad,
wow.
and I tried to really milk that wonderful because James Stewart loves his vowels. Chad, tell us about "It's a Wonderful Life."
It's a Wonderful Life. It sure is. Directed by Frank Capra, written by Francis Goodrich, Albert Hackett, and Frank Capra. Cinematography by Joseph Walker and Joseph Biroc. Music by Dmitri Tiomkin. Starring James Stewart, Donna Reed, Lionel Barrymore, Thomas Mitchell, Henry Travers, Beulah Bondi, Ward Bond, Frank Phelan, and Gloria Graham. Synopsis: a man who has given up his personal dreams in order to help his community is helped by an angel named Clarence, based on The Greatest Gift by Philip Van Doren Stern.
Nice. Um, yeah, I mean James Stewart and Frank Capra, I believe both of them famously fought in World War II, correct? I believe that's the
I
case.
don't know.
Yeah, so I think they're also
James Stewart for sure, yeah.
yeah, James Stewart for sure. And I believe this was like his first thing after that. And I mentioned it earlier. I was like, this was not a big success, and I think
Right.
that only goes to show that you can never judge a movie not by its cover because that implies quality, but like on its box office success or anything like that. Like there
Mm,
are movies that become classics over time, and
The
I think
Thing.
this is probably the greatest example of it. Yeah, The Thing is another one.
Yeah.
But the fact that this is not just a beloved Christmas movie, but like the beloved Christmas movie, like it is the one. Like it's the one that like you go around like ask everyone like this is in probably everyone's like top 10 Christmas movies, I
Oh yeah.
would think,
Oh yeah.
just because it's like iconic.
Unless
But
they
if
have
you ask right, if you ask someone in 47 or 48 though, they might not have even heard of this film or seen it, and that's what's so interesting because like this really did nothing in the box office really. It kind of fell on deaf ears. But Chad, you obviously have seen this before, right?
Oh yeah.
Have you seen the color version? Like, let's just touch on
I
that real
have.
quick. Have you?
Yeah.
You have.
Yeah.
Is it fine? Is it good?
I don't, it's just in color. Like, I
Right.
mean, I can't
Yeah.
really tell that much of a difference. I know that there's a big purity thing out there because it wasn't the like filmmakers that colorized it. It was like a different thing that
Right.
didn't really have the permission to do it, and they did it
Yeah.
anyway, so exists.
Hmm. Well,
I
because
prefer the black and white, but it's
right.
like,
Yeah, I think for this story specifically too. Sorry, I'll let you finish in
yeah,
just a sec. But like, it fits the vibe of the story. I think so much better to be in black and white because it is a hopeful story. But at the end of the day, like it starts in a lot of darkness. Like the lightness comes from the darkness. So I think to have it colorful the whole way through, especially when you film a movie, you intend it to be filmed a certain way, not just because of pride and stuff, but also just like the way you light things is different when you light it for black and white versus color. And that's
true.
why like Guillermo del Toro, famously for Nightmare Alley, shot his film as if it were a black and white film, and then ended up doing color and having to reshoot some stuff. But a lot of people say the black and white version of Nightmare Alley is better because
Mm,
that was originally intended. Where some people say the opposite of like Mad Max Fury Road or Logan because those were originally filmed for color, and then they made a black and white version, but they weren't
mm,
originally intended for black and white. So it's a big conversation. But again, it's not this huge thing that needs to be harped on. But I do think it was jarring watching like the first minute in color and being like, oh shoot, I got to change it.
mm.
Even though I am interested to maybe someday see this in color. I don't know. But Chad, tell us about It's a Wonderful Life and your thoughts, if you will.
Well, just going back to this like conversation about the filmmaking and the the colorization or whatever. It's like when I saw it in color and stuff, I honestly just was curious about the color version, or maybe the first version I ever saw with color. I can't even
Mm,
remember, to be honest. But like I didn't know that it was like a no or whatever to watch it in
mm,
color, and then I've talking to film fans and stuff who actually pay attention to black and white versus color. People are like, it's like this big thing, and I'm like, oh, okay, so that's fine. But now I only watch it in black and white. But
right.
like, it's one of those things where I can kind of understand though, because like if you aren't like super into like cinematography and stuff, if you go into black and white, it's almost like, well, it wasn't black and white because that was a choice necessarily at the beginning. It was just that's all they had to
Right.
film with.
True.
So once they got color, it's almost like, well, fix it. If it's black
Hmm.
and white, fix it, because you know
Right.
color is the ideal thing. That's what
Right.
everything is shot in now.
Which
So
is why it's so cool to then see, like, these years, like, the 40s and 50s, like, to see that it's kind of a blend of both. Because like,
yeah,
Wizard of Oz was the first big, like, "Yeah, we're gonna go color a and black and white," and then, like, from then on, it
and
was one or the other, and Gone with the Wind also was, like,
Jonathan.
very big on, like, color, color, color,
But Wizard of Oz had both,
had
right? Yeah,
both, yeah, and but even, like, this slate, like, Henry V is in color, The Yearling is in color, but the other 3 are in black and
yeah,
white, so it's very interesting to see even back then. I think it must have come down to, like, budget, or maybe just intention of, like, what they wanted to do
yeah.
preference-wise, but that's why it's so cool when nowadays when someone decides to actually make their movie in black and white,
Like the
it's a
artist
really
and
interesting choice,
was
like, The
the artist?
Artist and, like, the one we just talked about, the Tragedy of Macbeth that did it too, and Come
Yeah,
On, and
yep.
some other films do it, and it's an interesting choice when they do it now. But um, what
Francis Ha?
Francis Ha, yeah, that does black and white as well. Yeah,
I'm trying to, like,
yeah,
think of
trying to
these
think of
movies.
them. Yeah,
Was that black and
yeah,
white?
yeah.
Like, kind of a thing.
Roma, yeah, like there's a
Yeah.
lot of good ones in black and white, but that's another conversation for another day. But Chad, tell us about It's Wonderful Life. What do you love about It's Wonderful Life? Assuming you love it. I mean, you might hate it. This new rewatch may have really put you off to it. I don't know. Let's find out.
I hate it now. Yeah, no, the black and white stuff is very interesting to talk about. It's definitely a whole realm of like talking film, but yeah, It's a Wonderful Life is a classic. I love it. I didn't like. It's not like something I've been watching since I was a kid or anything like that. I got into it a little bit later, just because like I hadn't been, watching a lot of classics. But I voted Miracle on 34th Street to be like the best picture of that year,
As is,
and
yeah.
the classic Christmas films have become some of my favorite. Absolutely, and this one's no different. I love everything about this movie. I love, George Bailey. I love, seeing him as a kid going into adulthood and just seeing his like, I mean, it's really sad. It's like seeing his dreams of just exploring. Like, he's even talking to that little girl and he's like, say, brainless, don't you even know where coconuts come from? And he like wants to like, go explore and like do that. It's kind of like the guy from Up.
I was about to say, that
Yeah.
was my next point. I wrote it down. I was like, talk about Up, because it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, the idea of like you have this dream, but then other people that you care about more than yourself, like you almost put others before yourself, to where
Yeah.
then it's too late, and he doesn't go to Paradise Falls because Ellie dies, and then he has to like kind of give up that dream until he's forced to leave, and then he finds that opportunity. Whereas here, it's like, yeah, he puts everyone else above himself to where he never really gets to do what he wants, and it's
Yeah.
sad. It is sad. Like this film is dark. It's as much as it's like It's a Wonderful
Mhm.
Life. It's like it's kind of the opposite of that until the end. Like there are bits and pieces of great stuff, like him falling in love is great, and like him and getting a family is great, but most of it is just all the shit he's been through,
Dude,
negative wise, and stuff he's doing for others. But it's more about bettering them than bettering himself, and that's why it all kind of piles up.
yeah, I mean, there's absolutely some fun stuff in the movie, but it's usually always kind of undercut by something dark right after it. Like
Yeah.
when, he's having the date with Mary and then she ends up naked in the bush. He's like, well, this is a very interesting situation. And then he gets like news about what is it? Like oh shit, what is the news that he gets? Someone dies, right?
Yeah, I mean, his father has a stroke, I
That's
know,
it.
and
Okay.
dies, and then, like, he has to, like, have the company now, otherwise the building and loan's gonna
Yeah,
go out of business, and
that's
that's
it.
another thing. It's like, does he necessarily wanna do that with his life? No, but it's, like, almost like he feels like he has to,
Called to duty
which
for
sucks.
his
Mhm,
family and his town community, and it's
mhm,
like, if he doesn't do it, no one else is gonna do it, and I understand that, I've been there, like, and,
mhm,
as a kind of that person in my family, I've
right,
had, like, regrets of things that I wanted to do that I never got to do,
mhm,
and I think we've all kind of been in these different situations a little
mhm,
bit, and we can relate to it, and I think that's
yep,
why it's so universal and stands the test of time
right,
and something that you would want to watch every year to
mhm,
because it does have that really sad tint to it, but then it has that uplifting thing when he
yeah,
finds out what the meaning actually is. It's not about getting to go and do everything that you always dreamed of doing. It's, being grateful and love the things that you have
yeah.
and, being a good person and stuff like
Mhm.
that.
Well, I have to ask you a question because,
Yeah.
like, a lot of people, they don't have this debate as much as they have with Die Hard, but a lot of people sometimes ask, like, is this like a traditional Christmas movie? Like, it doesn't have Santa, it doesn't have elves, it's not about gift giving necessarily until like the very end. It takes place at
Mm-hmm.
Christmas, but some people argue that it's like, no, it's a drama, it just happens to take place on Christmas. But I'd argue, I mean, at least my point of view, that like
Mm-hmm.
when I think of Christmas, like it's all about giving and like family and all that stuff, but also like this is also a very stressful time of year. As lovely as Christmas is,
Mm-hmm.
like prepping for Christmas, buying gifts, making sure the end of it's like the end of the year. It's like everything's piling up, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what's so relatable about this film is that it's a Christmas movie because so many people are feel like they're almost drowning at Christmas because so much is going on that like when Christmas finally comes, it's like then it could be like this cathartic thing with family after like kind of a stressful time, and like it's the end of the year, you can reflect, and it's all about reflection. I think Christmas is a great time to reflect on what you have and what you've been through, and that's why I think this is the ultimate Christmas movie because of that, because it has that idea of reflection and just looking at your life and being with the people you love. Like it doesn't need Santa Claus to like qualify as a Christmas movie because I think the holiday plays such an integral part, and also the time of season. Like seasonal depression is also a thing, and this is the time of the year where most people get most depressed. Is the seasonal stuff, and I think that
Yeah.
also plays into it too. Like I think it's essentially a winter film. Like it has to be a winter film. It has to be a Christmas film because everything's piling up at this time. Everyone wants their money back because they're buying gifts or all this stuff
Yeah.
is going on in their lives. It's the end of the year, and it's everything's catching up to him, and it's also seasonal depression and all that stuff, and the vibe, the cold wintry night, like it's all purposeful, I think. So like I see the argument where people are like, well, it's not really a Christmas film, it's a great film that happens on Christmas. So I'd like to hear your take on that too, because you're such a Christmas fiend, and I know there's so
Yeah.
many films that like even I'm like kiss kiss bang bang, yeah, you can join the club, I don't care, you're adjacent, I don't care. Die Hard is another one where I'm like, it's a Christmas movie, it is.
Yeah.
And we won't get into that now, but like what is your stance on this as a like Christmas movie and the Christmas themes and what it means to you in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, you and I really just agree on this. Like, you and I are very inclusive, I think, for film. And I'm not saying people who disagree with us are, exclusive.
Hmm.
But like, if it has something to do with Christmas, you can make a good argument for why. Sure, I don't understand why somebody would go, that's not a Christmas movie. That's not a Christmas movie. Like, why are you trying to like narrow it down to like these core Elf? That's the only Christmas movie. Like, I just don't understand that. And I'm the same way with like horror. Like, so many people are like, that's not a horror. That's technically a drama. That's not horror. That's a comedy.
If
And
it
I'm like,
scares you, like
even if
that's
it
my call.
doesn't scare you, like What We Do in the Shadows, I'd say that's still a horror. It's like a horror
Mm,
comedy. But
yeah.
anyways, getting off track. Yeah, this movie's definitely a Christmas movie, and I don't see why someone would want to say it's not.
Mhm.
I didn't actually think about the things that you said about the seasonal depression and stuff like that, but it makes sense. Christmas, yeah, I mean, that all does make sense. Christmas is a depressing time, sometimes, somewhat
Yeah, not the actual like holiday.
for some
Obviously, we
people.
love the holiday. It's cheery, it's merry, but also
Um,
like there's a lot of stuff that happens around the holidays that
yeah.
can be stressful. Yeah.
But like also I think like you don't have to like look at like the entire movie as this depressing movie because it does have the uplifting thing. I mean, it does take place during Christmas. It does have him, finding the joy in like being with his family and, uh, cherishing the things he has. It's not just Thanksgiving where you show, what you're thankful for. It's Christmas. It's like, yeah, it is being
Hmm.
with family, and it's, also having a sense of like community and just,
Yeah.
being good for the people around you, even at the expense of, yourself, the gift of giving, and
Mm,
not taking. And that's exactly what George is. He's all giving. And it's almost like it just like, he gives so much that he gives everything away and he doesn't
yeah.
have anything left for himself. And then he's going to go kill himself. And then you have the phenomenal Clarence.
Yeah. Which happens so late in the movie, and I think that's so
It's
funny
like the
because a lot of
last
people,
like 20
yeah,
minutes.
when people parody this film, it's all just like the last 30 minutes or 20
Yeah.
minutes, like you said. Like it's the whole like, well, I'm going to show you what would have happened if he didn't exist. The first time I watched this, which was only 2 years ago, I like this is still fresh for
Oh,
me.
okay.
the first time I watched this, I expected it to start with him on the bridge and like Clarence being like, "Yo, let me take you through your life and show you." But it's not that. It's instead
Like
Clarence.
a
I mean, because
Christmas Carol type of
yeah,
thing.
from the
Yeah.
beginning, you still see Clarence in a way as a star, and he is looking through kind of the greatest hits of George Bailey's life. And we the audience are seeing his whole life, but that like whole like what if you were never born thing doesn't happen until the very end, which is so
Yeah.
interesting, which I didn't realize was coming. And I get that maybe that's why people aren't always ready to call it like a Christmas movie, because like so much of it is just his life, but also like when his kid brother drowns, like that's in wintertime, they're playing on the pond in the
Yeah.
middle of like Christmas time. And also just the idea that like in my mind, Clarence is looking through all these memories on Christmas Eve. Like it is all taking place on Christmas Eve. It's just these are all flashbacks essentially, but like the whole thing starts and ends on Christmas Eve for me. But yeah, the Clarence stuff is so good. Like, tell us about that, Chad. I'm sure you love Clarence.
Oh yeah, I mean, who doesn't love Clarence? It's hilarious. I love like his just line where he's like, there's got to be a better way to get my wings, kind of a deal. Because like dealing with George is so hard, I guess, because he's so broken down.
Yeah,
and
he's kind of nasty at times at the end. Like he becomes a raging monster. Yeah,
yeah,
which is not normal for Jimmy Stewart.
When he pops into his house. And he's just like, berating his friend. Why are you playing that same damn song over and over? And just like being really shitty to everybody. And it's almost like, look, I've been there. I think everyone has had those moments with their family where they've been there and they just like, they had a really bad day. They come in, they snap, they say something really stupid and just angry. And then like later you got to go, oh, I was such a jerk. And he has that moment. I mean, it kind of takes Clarence to show him that. I guess in the moment he kind of gets that too when his kids start crying and he's like, oh God. Yeah. But he doesn't really truly change until Clarence shows him like the kind of the Christmas Carol type of thing. Like, this is what this is how you've helped everyone. Yeah. And I love how he's like a really like, a really hopeful, caring young kid. Like one of my favorite scenes is when, because he has the hurt ear and in the pharmacy, the pharmacy where he works, the pharmacist is about to like make a mistake and poison a kid. And then the pharmacist beats George Bailey on the ear. And then he says, I know you're hurting. I know you're sad, but you're about to make a mistake and you did a bad thing, but you didn't mean to. And I don't know. I just love that so much. That's like so Christmassy to me because it's like that spirit of, you made a mistake and I'm not going to let you do it. But, I understand you and I hear you and I see you. And it's just such a sweet, tender moment between them. And
because you also find out just from a visual cue that his son just died too.
Yeah.
When he gets that little letter. And so George knows, he's like, this guy's going through shit. I'm not going to blame him, but he also made a mistake and I don't want to put someone else's life in danger. And you find out in the not the flashback, but when he goes through his life that if he wasn't around, that guy gets poisoned. And then this guy loses his job and becomes this like bum
pariah of the community and everyone hates him.
Yeah.
And then everyone hates George Bailey, like this George Bailey, because they're like, oh, you're a friend of that guy? Get the hell out of here.
Yeah. It's such a good ending. Like that whole last 20 minutes is so magical. And I think that's why when I rewatch this film, that's always the stuff I'm always waiting to get to because I'm like, I want to get to that. Yeah. My only other favorite scene in the middle is when they're at the dance and they open up the pool. I love that scene because it's so funny, but it's also like so sweet. And it's like just that perfect classic, like fun, like kids being kids moment. It's such an iconic moment. The dancing's fun, the music's fun. Like I love that scene. I do think in the middle a little bit it gets a little slow with like the building and loan stuff. It's a lot of that before it gets in the ending. Like I think it could be a little shorter, but again, the ending is so good that it like brings everything together, ties everything up so nicely. Yeah. I cry so much. Like when he finally like hears the bell and knows that he's getting the wings. I'm like, and my favorite version of this is not my favorite version of this. This is my favorite version of this, but of all the parodies they've done of this, my favorite is in the show iCarly because it's this angel named Mitch, and he wants to get his wings. And at the end, he's like, I got my wings. It's him chowing down on chicken wings. it's like he got his wings. He has his like chicken wings. It's the funniest thing in the world. Like that's just creative. Like he got his wings. It's him pouring buffalo sauce and ranch all over them. I'm like,
there was a bell,
like, wow.
and then he got his buffalo wings.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Yeah, the dance scene's iconic. I love that. It's someone like they want to play a prank on him, and then George and his date is with Mary, right? They fall into the pool, and then he just keeps dancing in the pool, and I'm like, that's how you get show. Like he's really fun and like free spirited, and he doesn't get angry that he's in the pool. He's like, oh, I'm in the pool, I'm gonna still dance, and stuff like that. And we haven't talked about the terrible Mr. Potter.
Yeah, tell us about Mr. Potter, Chad.
Mr.
Are you a
Potter,
fan? You're a fan of young Mr. Potter from the Wizarding World, but
yes.
are you a fan of this one?
Not really. He's a piece of shit, and he's kind of embodies like, the the worst of the kind of jaded like businessman who doesn't care for that sentimentality and all that, stupid, like, you can't lead with emotion. It's all business. You have to take advantage of anybody that you come across, and if someone makes a mistake and misplaces some money and I know where it is, I'm not going to tell them where it is, stuff like that. And it's just like, he's the one that's, tearing down this community. And it's like, he's the big bad, the villain, and George Bailey is the superhero for this town. And when you go back into the lands where George didn't exist, it's called Potterville.
Yeah, which sounds like a cool Harry Potter amusement park in retrospect, but back then they were probably it's terrifying.
It is, yeah. Yeah, I mean, played brilliantly by Lionel Barrymore, but still, I mean, he's just like, you talk about Darth Vader, but I mean, Darth Vader's no Mr. Potter. It's like,
I mean, he doesn't. You can't come across a Darth Vader in real life. And now that I said that, I'm probably going to. But there are so many Mr. Potters, and it's kind of what we talked about. It hasn't come out yet, but your Disney ranking on your channel, like sometimes the scariest villains are the realest ones. It's the priest in Hunchback. It's the stepmother in Cinderella, because they don't have magical powers. They're just strictly evil people with their own agendas, and they are what a lot of society is sometimes gaslit into believing, and it's scary. So yeah, like he's definitely an example of that, just like the real villain, like embodiment of a real life scenario, what you could actually encounter.
Yeah, and I love just when George as a little kid just overhear, like he doesn't have a care in the world. He just wants to like go and do his kid stuff, and then he just hears his dad being like kind of berated by Mr. Potter and insulted, and he's like, don't let him push you around like that. You're better than he'll ever be, and in some ways he's right. And then later he finds out what it is like to go toe to toe with Mr. Potter, and I just love the spirit of a guy, who against everything he ever wanted will just do everything to help his own community, his family, and I don't know. I love this movie. It is so good.
Classic for a reason. And it sadly has the smallest showing. Actually, no, Henry V has the smallest showing, but it also loses every award it's up for, and only up for 5. Again, like this became a hit over time, which I think is great because like it shows that any film can survive. Best Picture, Best Director for Frank Capra, Best Actor for Jimmy Stewart, Best Sound Recording, and Best Film Editing. So, just a great 5 nominations. Doesn't win any, but I'm pretty sure it will win maybe an award later in our show. We'll see. We'll have to talk about it later. It's certainly in contention for one of my categories. James, George Bailey goes through some shit. I mean, I'm surprised he didn't have a full beard by the end of all the stressful shit he went through. He really needed a good shave. Just shave off everything. Get right down to the razor's edge. Chad, tell us about the razor's edge. That was a better segue than the one I did off air beforehand, right?
That's great. The Razor's Edge, directed by Edmund Goulding, written by Lamar Trotty and Daryl F. Zanuck. Cinematography by Arthur C. Miller. Music by Alfred Newman and Edmund Goulding. Starring Tyrone Power, Gene Tierney, John Payne, Herbert Marshall, Ann Baxter, and Clifton Webb. No relation. Synopsis.
Really?
I don't know.
I wrote long lost ancestor of Chad's.
Maybe. I don't know. Synopsis. A man jaded from war seeks to find meaning in life and meaningful experiences. Based on The Razor's Edge by W. Somerset Maugham. And then I wrote a quote from the end that I really liked.
Oh, cool. Yeah, literally the book comes out 2 years before, and we see this a lot, especially in the olden
Mhm.
days of like we talked about with like Of Mice and Men, where it's like, oh, this hot book, we need to get the rights to it and make it into a movie. And I think some books it works well for, some it doesn't.
Mhm.
We'll talk about this one, but like it's very interesting about like why this one needed to be made so quickly. And I think it goes back to what we were saying about Best Years of Our Lives. Like this is fresh off the war. They really want to get you while it's hot, like while it's still like in your mind, kind of like how we saw so many films about like terrorism and 9/11 right after that happened. And like how we're still seeing stuff about COVID kind of, in stuff like Glass Onion, The Razor's Edge about war, very topical, very urgent in the sense that like they wanted to get this out probably right away. And it does kind of the same thing as Best Years of Our Lives in the terms of like
Mhm.
it's not about the war, it's about coming home, but it's a much different film. Like it's
Oh yeah.
much less about just like coming home and readjusting, more so about like almost feeling guilt that like you survived and someone else died, and so now
Yeah.
you need to find yourself and you need to find that spiritual side of things. And I like how it's not in Best Years of Our Lives, a lot of the characters when the others come home are almost like a little hesitant, like you said, like hesitant to like show off what they've got, or a little bit more like apprehensive around them. Whereas this one, like this main character played by Gene Tierney is like, um, wait, what? You're gonna like go on the spiritual journey? Don't you want to be rich and have this lavish lifestyle? And like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna call off this engagement. It's such a different pivot 180 for someone like Wilma to someone like this, where it's like this evil character, which we'll talk
Yeah.
about a little bit later, but because I have a lot to say about her. But Chad, what did you think of this? I'm assuming this was a first watch for you as well, and
Yeah.
please tell me about the quote that you really loved.
Yeah, I mean, this one, I feel like I do need to owe this one like a rewatch because I did have to kind of like rush this one because of
Mm.
the whole scheduling thing. But I did like this one. I liked the main character, Larry.
Larry, yeah,
Larry,
Tyrone Power, yeah.
yeah.
Who
Um,
also, I believe, went to war. Like I believe he was someone who
oh,
fought and then came home.
look at that!
He's famous. Actually, we talked about it earlier. There's so many crossovers. He was in the original Nightmare Alley. The original Nightmare Alley. He's the Bradley Cooper
That's
character. So
so
yeah.
cool.
So
Oh,
all these little crossovers in today's episode. It's
yeah.
funny.
Look at that. Yeah. I don't know. I liked the spirit of this guy. I liked how, because I'm very like where I like to sometimes challenge like the norm. And
Hmm.
that's kind of like what he did. He had a good reason for it. Like, came out of war. Like you said, he felt very guilty. And then he's like, I get like this kind of like stipend that's like $3,000 a year,
Hmm.
which no one today could live off of. That's
What?
insane.
But back then, that
Um,
was probably a lot of money, right?
I'm
Like,
sure.
yeah.
And so yeah, but he's like, I'm gonna live off of that and just kind of like go have experiences, find myself, maybe find God, find the meaning of life, and
Hmm.
like, just live. And people thought he was nuts. And even at the end, they're like, you need to go to a therapist or something like that. And
Right.
you know, and then yeah, the quote was goodness is the greatest force in the world, and he's got it. It's almost
Yeah.
like this guy, he knows it. He knows
It's the George
the
Bailey thing too. Yeah.
yeah. And there's like a scene where he comes back. They, haven't seen him in a while, and he went to India. He learned things there, and he came back, and he like helps this guy, and like shows him how to cure his headache
Hmm.
that he's been having, and then he's just like, I didn't really do anything. You had the power all along. I just like influenced or whatever.
Yeah.
And then like that guy's like never could get over the fact that this guy helped him or
Mhm. And
whatever.
it's the guy that this woman ends up marrying too, which is
Yeah.
so interesting. It's the rich guy she wanted him to be, which
Yeah.
is such a cool like little moment when he's the one who kind of comes in and does this little like hypnotism type thing with him. Um,
Yeah. It's like no matter how rich you get or whatever, you're like sometimes you still don't have all the answers. You
mm,
still, money can't buy everything kind of message, I guess. And I really like that. Yeah, I just really like that concept of, I'm just going to go do this. Like, I know everybody wants me to do this, but I'm going to go do this. And
mm,
I don't know. I always like characters that do that. Like, going back to November, the Hurt Locker, when you have like all these guys are like, you should do this. And then Jeremy Renner's like, well, I'm going to do this.
Right.
And then I just love when characters are like that. And so, yeah, that really worked for me. There's also, I can't remember which character he was, but there's this one guy who has one of the best voices I've ever heard in a movie. Every time he talked, I was like, ooh, I like that guy.
I don't know which one you're talking about. Maybe it was well, because I find it interesting. There's a
Elliot or
actual
Magum or something like that.
yeah. So that's the character. That's the guy who wrote the book, and it's
Right.
interesting because he's not in the book. He's like the narrator. So they literally wrote
Yes,
a
the
role
narrator.
for him
Yeah.
in this. Yeah, like they wrote a role for him in this movie. It would be like if in Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling was one of the students observing.
He
Like,
had a very
like that's
soothing voice.
yes, like that would be the equivalent of this. Like it's the author that they decided to make a character in this movie. It's kind of like a weird meta thing, which I kind of like because again, it again this brings me back to another film, Henry V. It's like how do you convey all this exposition when it's a book? Like it's written for you. Like how do you do that in a movie? And here you have the author to kind of do it. Whereas Henry
Yeah.
V. also you had like a guy to be the chorus. You know, like I like that.
You get that guy, or you get Morgan Freeman, and then
Right.
you're good.
Yes. Morgan Freeman should be in the remake of the remake because I don't think he was in the actual remake with Bill Murray. But
Of what? The Razor's Edge?
yeah, the
Oh,
80s.
okay.
Is it 80s or 90s?
89.
89.
Right?
Yeah, they made a Bill Murray film also of this, and I'm interested to see that because
Maybe I'm thinking of Henry V.
I think the one issue with this film that I have is I think because they made it such a priority to get this book turned into a movie so fast, I feel like they sometimes lost a little bit of clarity. I think it's a little too much plot all over the place because you can tell they don't really know what to cut from the book because it does feel a little long. And I
Okay.
think there are subplots that are sometimes lost. Like I really do love Anne Baxter in this as Sophie
Yes.
and what she goes through with her alcoholism, but it's also like she's really not as connected to the main story. It's almost kind of like the subplot that like is another added thing because I think it's all about Larry and Isabel, and then you have Elliot also on top of that, Clifton Webb's character, your great ancestor, Mr. Webb. Like he's also around there too, kind of the voice of reason in Isabel's ear, saying like, "You want to marry someone rich? Yeah, you want to marry someone rich." So I feel like there's other characters that I feel like in the book were much more fleshed out, whereas in the movie sometimes they get a little undercut because it is all about his journey. And I think that's the thing that's different from this in Best Years of Our Lives. Best Years of Our Lives is 3 different characters, so you can kind of have their own stories, whereas here it's one guy, so you're just focused on him. But I think because they're just focused on him, some of the other characters feel underdeveloped or one note or something like that, or aren't given enough time because they are so interesting. I wanted to almost see more of them and more of that more of those relationships as it went. Yeah, I just think it's a little long. It's a little like it's a little unfocused for me, whereas like Best Years of Our Lives is longer but still somehow feels more easy to follow, a little bit clearer about what it's trying to come across and get across. And again, I know I talked about earlier, it's one of those unbridged things of she plays the role so well but I hate her so much is Isabel. It's Jean Tierney's performance. She's so good at being this like evil, like controlling, like manipulative,
with the alcohol
gold
and
digging,
stuff like
wanting
that. Yeah.
well, yeah, like she's kind of like the one who kind of eggs on the drinking for Anne Baxter's character, and that's
downward
awful too.
spiral for her.
Yeah, and she's such a good villain that I almost like hate to watch her, and every time she's on, I was like, oh, get her off my screen. But I was also like, but you're also really good in the role, which is why I want you off my screen. So yeah, I owe this one a rewatch too. Like this one didn't resonate for me, especially because when looking at this and Best Years of Our Lives, they're both such a similar deal of like, this is what it's like to come home from war. And I think that film just kind of encompasses more stuff to me than this. This is much more about the spiritual, but even then, like, I think it dwells on some things that take a little too much time, and it's like, all right, on to the next. Yeah, I didn't love this one, but I still enjoyed bits and pieces, and I did respect it, especially the fact that they just got this made so quickly. It was impressive to see them adapt it, but I'm interested to read the book and see if that's
Okay.
different and what they change and all that stuff, because I could tell it's like there's a lot of rich language in it too that like probably works better in the book than it does on screen. Kind of like Henry V. It's like some of this language is not as cinematic as they like to believe. It's almost a higher end way of talking. It doesn't feel real all the time because it's like this rich, luscious language,
But it's interesting when you have like a movie that, you're like, well, I think this is unfocused, maybe like some of the parts are better than the whole. But then you're like, I'm still kind of interested enough to maybe read the book and then go back and watch it again. When we talked about Life of Pi, I remember watching the movie, loving it, and then going, wow, okay, I really like this. Let me go and read the book. And then I'm reading the book and I'm like, I don't like this book that much because it like goes way, way too much into the animal abuse and stuff
Right.
like that. And I'm like, I'm glad I cut all
I
that
know.
shit
Well,
down.
sadly, we got to talk about animal abuse
We
very
do.
soon, but yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I do, but I did kind of like the whole stuff with Sophie. I mean, like and hate because it's really
Mm,
sad.
right.
But because she loses her husband and her daughter, and then yeah, like
It's tough. Yeah.
you have Isabel over here like kind of like boasting that she still has her kids, and then
Hmm.
you have like the sad moments of Sophie being upset and drinking and going to like an opium den and then and then her tragic murder, which is kind of
Hmm.
like it ends up in like a little bit of a murder mystery at the
Yeah.
end there.
Yeah, it's just like so much stuff in it where I'm like, it could have used some sorting through. Maybe I don't know. Maybe this should have been 3 hours to sort it out, or maybe it should have been shorter and they cut a few things. But yeah, I agree. Anne Baxter's really good in it. I mean, she wins supporting actress for this for good reason.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she gives a pretty good performance. It's just like for me, it didn't all come together as well. But again, like it's hard when there's another film that's kind of doing the same thing that I already love so much that it's
Ah,
tough to
okay.
follow it up. Um, but this one did gross a lot of money. Like this was in the top 10 as well. Like this and Best Years of Our Lives did make a lot of money. So this was a critical hit and an audience hit as well compared to the other three. I don't think It's a Wonderful Life, Henry V, or The Yearling touched the top 10 that year in terms of box
Mm.
office, but this one did. It was like number 7 or 8, so that's pretty cool. And probably because it was a popular book. So I want to check it out. The Razor's Edge only wins 1 of 4, and that one is Anne Baxter for Best Supporting Actress. It's also nominated for Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor for Chad's great grandfather Clifton Webb, and Art Direction for Black and White. So not color. It's Art Direction, Black and White. But let's transition from black and white to color, and let's talk about that animal abuse we alluded to. Let's talk about the Yearling. It's the year of the Yearling. That's the the tagline on the poster. It's the year of the Yearling. I'm like, okay. Let's talk about it, Chad.
Yeah, I'll never stop laughing at that. It's like Shaun of the Dead. If you keep doing it, I'll never stop laughing at that Clifton Webb joke. Anyways, The Yearling, directed by Clarence Brown, written by Paul Osborne, cinematography by Arthur Arling, Charles Rosher, and Leonard Smith. Music by Herbert Slothart. Starring Gregory Peck, Jane Wyman, Claude Jarman Jr., and some cute deer. Synopsis: a young boy adopts a deer. Based on The Yearling by Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings.
Yeah. Just a disclaimer about the book part. Yeah, like this was actually a book I had read. I had never seen the movie, but I had read this book.
Oh,
My
okay.
granny, my great grandmother, who sadly passed away in 2017 or no 2018. She, when I was younger, for Christmas one year, gave me her copy, which was an original copy of the
Whoa.
book, which was really cool because the book came out in 1938. Yeah, so it was a 1938 copy of The Yearling. I still have it on my shelf at home in Jersey, not here, but it's like sitting on my shelf. It's all dusty. It's this green cover, hardcover, and I read it when I was young. I didn't really grasp it much beyond it being about a kid and his deer, because that's the crux of what it is. It's like this
Mhm.
kid and his deer. Even though in the movie it takes an hour and a half to get to it,
Yeah,
but like,
yeah.
but the book, it's more or less this story. It's I think it's a little easier read than visualized, some aspects
Yeah.
of it, especially the animal abuse. I mean, a
Oh, yeah.
story like this, it's hard to shy away from because that is literally the theme of the movie. Is like what life and death, and also animals and wildlife, and what's wildlife, what's pet, all this stuff. But I do want to say, like, I have a personal connection to it because of that, and for that reason, like, I was excited to watch this movie, and like, even though I think the book is better than the movie, I have problems with the movie. Like, I still think that nostalgia of the book and just her memory is like kind of cool. Like, because it's also not as cringy, some of the things in the book, which I have an appreciation for the story because of that. Where I'm like,
Mm,
oh, this is like a fond memory I have of her. So I was interested to see the film,
love
and
that. Yeah.
the film is interesting too. We'll talk about it. But Chad, this is the first watch for you, I believe.
Yes.
What do you think of The Yearling?
Well, first of all, I love that little story about the connection with you and your
Mm.
grandma, because that's very sweet.
Yeah, if I can bring it in for the next episode, I'll show you all the book. So I can like.
It kind of makes me want to read the book since you said it's better than the movie, because
Mhm.
I kind of fucking hated this movie.
Okay.
You know how I feel about animals. You already
Yeah.
expressed your thing, and it's just because I kind of hated not the little boy, but I hated the parents.
Oh, yes. So
in the
you
movie.
hated the characters of the parents, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Because Gregory Peck is amazing, and
Oh,
I think
he's fantastic.
Jane Wyman is also great too. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I don't really know her, and I don't like hate her as a person or as an actress. And I love Gregory Peck. Of course, he was at the Gentleman's Agreement,
yes, he was
and
our best friend.
To Kill a Mockingbird, right? But yeah, no, I don't know. Like, I know that there's like this like overarching message, like the little boy is actually the yearling or something like that, even though the yearling is another name for like a deer, like a
Yeah,
baby
like a deer
deer.
that's a baby deer that's grown. Like when a deer finally grows, he becomes a
Yeah.
yearling.
Okay. And they're
He's
like,
not a buck yet, but he's a yearling. Like it's
finally a
not a baby, I
yearling.
guess. Yeah.
And so I don't know if like maybe some of the cringe stuff you're talking about is like the whole toxic masculinity, where he's like, I don't want my boy to see me in a dress.
Kind
a
of. I mean,
deal.
for me, it's the very first shot of this is devoted to the people who came and who came
Yes.
to our
I
land
forgot
and
about that.
killed the Indians. I'm like, what? I'm like,
Holy shit.
from a 2022 lens, and I'm an Italian. Like Columbus Day is also the day where they have the Italian Pride Parade in New York City. Like I recognize that there's some problematic shit that happened, but like it's still a day where the Italians celebrate Italian heritage. It just happens to be Columbus Day, so that's a little icky. But like I
Keep
can
the heritage, still tear down the statue.
right. That's my thing. It's like I, as an Italian, can even acknowledge like that stuff is problematic. We should not be glorifying the people that conquered the land. We should be remembering the ones who lost their land in order to give us what we have now. And that's sad to think about. But like there were a lot of people who lost their lives to lose their homes to then allow for the buildings we live in to be there, and that's sad. And for this to open with that dedication was the cringy thing to me. I was like, ooh. And then to just like find out like this is about a Confederate soldier, which is not really terrible because it doesn't well, and again, it doesn't ever dive into slavery. Like they never talk about slavery or the Civil War in this, but he is a Confederate soldier, Gregory Peck. So it's like just kind of that stuff is like a little off-putting, and the book probably mentions it too, but when I was young I didn't really care less about that. But like that stuff they don't really dwell on it too much, but that kind of stuff already as a viewer watching that opening title card of this is dedicated to those who fought and died to conquer the land from the Native Americans. I'm like, and then it's nothing to really do with this movie. I mean,
at all.
The movie
really
has something to do with nature and the way that we like, nature is nature and we don't mess with nature. And the fact that like, yeah, you shouldn't take a deer home because it's a wild creature. It should be out in the wild. And like, that's what this kid learns. It's like he can't have this as a pet. It's a sad thing, but it's kind of like Fox and the Hound. It's like you can't keep this as a pet for so long. You have to let it go. And that stuff is strong. I think that messaging is fair and justified. I mean, obviously some of the ways they go about it with some of the brutality is a little much. I mean, the bear fighting the hound dogs. I mean, like, yes, they're hunting dogs, but I was like, oh my God, this bear is going to kill him. And I was actually shocked that the bear did such a poor job in fighting them because he didn't kill any of those dogs. And like, you would think a bear, if it could beat Leonardo DiCaprio, could probably beat a dog. But I mean, hey, good on those dogs for surviving that bear attack. And poor bear, like he was just minding his own business. And that's the thing about this movie. It's like some of that stuff is just like, oh, it's a little off-putting. But I think the central story about the kid and his deer is kind of endearing. When you said that you hated the parents, I agree. Like, I think you're supposed to like definitely disagree with the way they parent the kid. But in my opinion, the kid, I think, is just such a bad actor that his stuff is more cringy to me. Every time he's like really hamming it up, I'm like, I think he's actually best at the end when he's like crying over his deer because you can tell there's like genuine tears. But like early on, like, I'm sorry, it's not his fault, obviously, and he's still alive now. He's an old man probably, but this guy Claude Jarman Jr., like nothing against him, but it's like he wasn't directed the best. Like he's not that good, and he's such a centerpiece of this film that it's like it's hard to watch this kid for 2 hours when he's not really the most crisp, especially when you just talk about It's a Wonderful Life. There's a great kid performance in that. There's great kid performances in so many films. I mean, we just saw The Fabelmans, which has so many good kid kid performances.
Good.
So it's kind of like that where I'm just like the parents are annoying, their characters are annoying, and then the kid, his performer the actor is in the movie. So I'm just like, it's a blend of all the wrong things. But
yeah, I totally get that. I mean, I do like that character, but I do understand. Yeah, I agree. And I don't know. I didn't know what to. I didn't know what this film was about. Like you did because you read the book, but I didn't really know what it was. I remembered seeing the boy with the deer on the cover, and then it is funny that it doesn't come in till, like you said, like when the movie's almost over.
And the way it comes about is so weird. The dad gets bit by a rattlesnake, and then to get the venom out, he needs to kill this deer to use the deer liver, which is like a real thing that hunters would do if they were ever dying of venom poisoning. Like deer liver is apparently supposed to heal that. It's kind of like how you get, if you get stung by a jellyfish, you have to have another human being pee on you to get the stinging done. Like it's just one of those weird things that happens because science. But just that whole moment of like, shoot it, get the deer, get the liver, carve it out. And I'm like, ugh. And then he's like, but there's a little baby deer out there. Can I save it? I'm like, that's your inciting incident? Like, couldn't it just be that the mother gets freaked and run away and then never comes back for some reason?
Dude,
and like, it could be like a Bambi thing where like you hear that, like you hear a gunshot and you're like, oh shit, and then you see the little baby and it's like, oh, I'll take care of you. Instead, it has to be this like gruesome thing. And like, yes, that's in the book too, but it's just so much more graphic and jarring and in your face when you see it put to screen, you know?
Yeah. So they begin this movie with this stupid phrase. It's almost like a Gone with the Wind. Like they didn't learn their lesson from that fucking stupid movie. Sorry. It's kind of stupid sometimes.
Yeah, you rated it higher than me.
And then I did. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's still
No,
a stupid movie.
Totally fair. It's beautifully shot. And
it is.
We'll talk about this film because I think there are some very big pluses, which we'll talk about soon. But yeah,
okay.
keep going.
I don't know. I'm interested to hear those.
I mean, it's along the lines of what I just alluded to.
It is one of those things where like I'd have to kind of like rewatch it knowing, because my watch of this was like totally emotional in a really bad way, because I got so angry when this movie was done, because it's like, you know, Gregory Peck's character, you know, I thought it was just like this like cute little country movie where it's like country dad and his country boy.
It's PG. I mean, it's for
and
kids.
They're just like, you know, hey son, we're gonna go do this down at the country store, and I'm just like, oh, I like that. This cool country accents. They're doing a good job. Whatever. Like this is an interesting little movie. The boy has like a friend who's like kind of crippled or whatever, and you know they have like a little interesting relationship. But then you have this whole stupid kind of scene with that you described everything that happens, and this man shows so much disrespect for nature and life that I understand he's trying to save his own life, but like he kills this deer in like a gruesome way, gets the liver, and then, you know, he neglects the deer at first, the baby deer, which is very cute. And it's like, I don't know what kind of monster could neglect a little baby deer like that or kill his mom. But people do. And then the little boy's like, let's go adopt that deer and bring him in. It's like, okay, well, yeah, it's a wild creature, and it is cute as like a little baby pet for a little while. But then, like, he just shows so much neglect, and like he's like, all right, well, you can try, you can build this like fence and work really hard, and the little boy does, and then the deer jumps over and starts eating the crops. And it's like, well, you know, we live on these crops, so you know, if the deer eats them, we can't survive. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to kill the deer. Like that's the first thing where he goes, and the little boy is smart. He's like, no, I'm gonna like
take him far away, and
he's gonna shoo. I don't want you anymore. Kind of like a Harry and the Hendersons type of deal.
It's sad. And that's very
and
sad.
He's like, you know, I don't want you anymore. You go. And it's almost kind of like what they do in The Fox and the Hound. It's like, you know, he back into nature, and it's like, that's where you belong. You know, go have a happy life. And then the deer, sadly, and you're like, no, do not go back there because these people are horrible. And then the deer does go back. And then he's like, well, I don't know why you didn't kill that deer like I told you to, but now you have to. So the mom goes to kill the deer, which the mom was very vocal about hating the deer. And then the little boy goes, you know, because she only like wounds it. So the little boy has to do the killing shot.
Because he doesn't want him to die slowly. So he's just like, I'll just do it. Yeah, it's sad.
And so then he yells at his mom and he's like, I hate you. And then I was doing the same thing to her, yelling at the screen, like, I hate you. And then he's like, you hated him all along. And, you did that on purpose. And then he leaves. He does this weird like journey on the river and then comes back. And then he's apologetic to his parents. And then his dad's like, yeah, well, you learned a hard lesson. And that's what my boy, I knew my boy would have to learn these hard lessons about life, that sometimes you have to deal with life. And I wanted you to hold on to your innocence so much. And I really wanted that for you, and it's like, you piece of shit. Like you should have been like a real parent for a little bit, not killing a deer, having your kid kill a deer in a very gruesome way, like a psychopath, and then agreeing to have the kid bring the deer back only to have to kill it later.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of kid are you raising here?
And then that's when
idiot.
Yeah, that's when the mother does come home. And because this whole movie, I think, yeah, I agree with you. It's very fucked up, and the parents are not good parents, and that's the big con for this movie. I think the plus is the deer is cute, and the deer, I love the shot where he's in the bed and he's like, scooch over. I'm like, oh, that's so cute. I also really do like the story arc with the mother and son, not necessarily the father and son, but in the fact that she is so against him. And it's kind of like this thing that we see in Ordinary People, where it's like she lost her whole family except for her one son. In that one, it's more like she resents her son. In this one, it's more she's afraid to connect because she doesn't want to lose him and then feel that vacancy again. But then at the end, she does lose him, and that's when he runs away from home, and she goes out searching. And then when he comes home and she comes home, she realizes that, like, no, I do love you, and I'm willing to now be your mother. And that's why I think it's interesting. Like, it almost has a more satisfying ending than Ordinary People, in the fact that that one she leaves, and in this one, like, she finally comes around. She's like, I've been so dumb. And I think her character arc is really profound, because it's like she's actually learned that, like, she was a shit mother because she didn't want to get close to her kid. And now at the end, she's finally embracing him, like, I'm so sorry, and like, I will do my best to be a good mom now. Like, I'm so sorry I was neglecting you. The dad stuff, I agree, is it's a bad speech. It's like, oh, well, that's the way of life.
And
I get
make me hate Gregory Peck.
And I get that's when I get the sentiment of, like, that's just how life is. It's sad. It's a circle of life. But it's just, it doesn't have as much care, in the sense, like, we talked about Avatar last month. They kill animals in that, but the whole thing is that afterwards, it's like they send them to Awa, and like they have this peaceful thing with thanking the nature. And I love that. I love how it's like
Natiri's like angry about it. Like, why did you cause this?
And even if she has to do the killing, she has to be like, I see you. Like, and that's what this movie's lacking, is any of that empathy and compassion. But I do like that last moment with the mother and her son, because I think she has that full arc of, like, it would be like if Mary Tyler Moore at the end of Ordinary People did finally embrace her kid and was willing to allow herself into his life, which that's totally fine that it goes in that round. That's what makes that such an interesting film, and such a different film, and a unique film. But this one's kind of the opposite, where it's like she learns that what she's been doing is wrong. And I think she's scarred by the whole deer thing too. She realized she hated this deer so much. I think it's because she hated her son so much, because she resented him and didn't want to get close to him. So at the end, that's what brings them together. It's sad that it had to be a deer that died to bring them together, but at the same time, it's also like this nice moment between mother and son, which I do like.
Fair.
Especially because I think it is well acted. But again, the kids, I'm not a great actor, and I think that takes me out of a lot of it as well. And another big plus that I alluded to earlier when I talked about the Gone with the Wind thing, is that this is gorgeously shot, and it's like you said, like, I like the vibe, like the folksy vibe, like all the lush trees and the actual color, the use of color. There are some great shots of the animals themselves and the way they're able to train the animals. And I like at the end how they say that no animals were harmed. I like that. And just to get animals to do stuff, like nowadays, if this movie was made, it would all be CGI and it would look kind of crappy. So I like that they're using actual trained animals. They have a trained bear and trained dogs doing stuff for a movie. Like, that's kind of cool. Unless that's not true, and I didn't do my research, maybe you know more about it. But like, I was like, that's just a very interesting thing that you don't see anymore, is like these real animals, which kind of gave me a little bit more of an appreciation, because like they obviously weren't tortured, which made me feel a little bit better about it. But like, like, this is a really good looking movie. It's well acted. It's just like, the characters, the parents are insufferable until the end where the mom's like, fuck me, I messed up. And I'm like, good, you're willing to admit to your flaws. And then the kid's just a bad actor. But like, that's what the thing. It's like got a lot of highs, but so many lows that bog it down. It's a very hit or miss film.
Two things.
Yeah, go
One,
for it.
it really feels like a Disney film, but it's not.
Right. Like
Did you
some
get that
moments.
vibe?
Yeah. I mean,
It's like this
like
kid and his
I feel
deer.
like there's like 40
Disney,
minutes of a Disney
the
movie inside
Yearling.
of the 2
That's right.
hours. And that's
Yeah.
another thing. Like that whole first hour needs to be shortened. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And the second thing, you gave me a great idea, a movie that I want to make right now.
Okay.
It's The Yearling, starring Andy Serkis as the deer, as the yearling. Mocap.
Oh my god.
And he's at one point he goes, "No!"
Oh my gosh. Oh, that would be something. That would be something. But yeah, I'm a little less harsh on it than you because I do like certain aspects.
It was
of
an
it.
emotional response.
But I know I get it, and you're totally justified to feel that way. I knew, especially with animal violence, going into this, I was like, oh, you're gonna love it. It's a story about a kid and his deer, forgetting of all the other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I because I haven't read it since I was young, and again, like maybe I'm letting that cloud my vision a bit because like I resonate this film with my grandmother, and I don't think my grandmother when she gave me this book was like, hey, look at this, it's a Confederate soldier who likes killing animals. I'm like, that's not what she was doing.
It's
But
also like a classic book,
it's a
so
classic book,
it's
and it's
not.
hard, and it's much easier to read than it is to watch. I think, like, and I think in
Mhm.
reading it, they might be more fleshing out of the parents, of the kid, of that mother. You get more of her perspective because I think she does have such an interesting arc. It's like the ordinary people thing. It's like such a
Yeah.
dark thing. Yeah, the dad though it's like Gregory Peck is great, but that's the only plus he has, you know. So yeah, I agree with you. It's weak. It's in my bottom half of this ranking. I'll spoil that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something I have a little bit more of a fondness for certain elements. But I agree, the whole has some big glaring issues.
And
sure.
no fault for anybody who likes the movie or likes the
Oh, yeah,
book. I wouldn't mind reading the book at some point. Maybe it would also give me a different perspective. But.
Yeah, and even then, like I haven't read the book since I was young, so it could be full of issues like this that I just was not
maybe
into. I was just like, oh, this boy and his deer, how cool. And I was like, oh, his friend
I love
died.
those cute parts.
Oh, Fodderwing. Oh no, Fodderwing. Yeah, but again, it's a mess. The Yearling, nominated for 7 awards, wins 2 of them. It wins Best Art Direction for color. It wins Best Cinematography color. Again, gorgeous movie. Picture. It's nominated for picture, for Best Director for Clarence Brown, Best Actor Gregory Peck, Best Actress for Jane Wyman, and Best Film Editing. So picks up some good nominations there. Only wins 2 of them. But now, Chad, we have to rank these films. I know what your number 5 is going to be, so why don't you just tell us, Chad? What is your number 5?
Well, I did initially actually have Henry V as my number 5,
okay.
but I did change it to The Yearling
Okay.
because of my anger at it. And then I'm like, well, Henry V I didn't really get, but it didn't anger me.
Right. That's fair, and I assume that means your number 4 is Henry V. But I
Yeah.
won't hold reservation. So I'll write
It
that in. It's interesting. My number 5 is, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. Like it just didn't work for me. I need to rewatch it again. Is The Razor's Edge? Just not my favorite. But number 4 is The Yearling for the reasons we've said.
Okay.
So your number 4 is Henry V, right? What is your number 3?
And this might be a hot take. The Best Years of Our Lives is my number 3.
All right. And my number 3 is Henry V. So what is your number 2, Chad?
The Razor's Edge.
All right. And my number 2, I don't know if this is a hot take, is It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, shit.
Maybe. Which means your number 1.
It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, and my number 1 is The Best Years of Our Lives. I love it. It's one of my favorite films ever. But these are 2 of my favorite films ever. So the fact that they're both in the same year is awesome. But because it's your number 1 and my number 2, that means our best picture from 1946 is It's a Wonderful Life, which makes sense. It's the Christmas season. Yeah, a good slate. I think it also comes down to preference. Like obviously I'm higher on Henry V and The Yearling, just based on otherworldly things. But I think we both agree It's a Wonderful Life is a great film, and it's a great winner for this slate. It's my number 2, your number 1. It's a great film, and one of the best Christmas films for sure.
For sure. And, it's not like, I didn't like kind of like fudge my ranking so that It's a Wonderful Life
No,
would
I know.
win.
Well, and you also didn't
Um,
know I would put Best Years at number
because I
1.
didn't know you
Yeah,
were gonna put that for one because I thought it was
yeah.
obvious that It's a Wonderful Life was
Well,
the
it's
best
it's one of my
one.
favorite Best Picture winners ever, Best Years of Our Lives, because I think no one talks about it. Like no one mentions it really. So when like I had watched it the first time, I was like, why does no one talk about this movie? Like it's so good. It just
Well,
really hit me in some great spots. So I was like, I wanted to give it its due, but I didn't want to say it earlier because I didn't want to tip off that it's my favorite.
gotcha.
Because It's a Wonderful Life is still like one of my top 5 Christmas films. So it's like this is, in my opinion, a very top heavy slate. It's like those 2 films are amazing. The other 3 are like, but those 2 films for me are like it.
And that's interesting because, like, I've heard people like in the film community talk about The Best Years of Our Lives as like one of the best. And then me watching it, I'm like, it's a really good film. But
Mm,
like sometimes I just find it so cheesy as I'm
yeah.
just like, about the soldiers being sad. And I'm like, okay. And
It's
that's
fun.
why I think I found The Razor's Edge a little bit more interesting because,
A little
like,
more edgy.
there you go. Because of that main character and like what he was doing, I just found was more interesting than the other 3. But
Totally
it
fair.
is what it is.
Hey, I mean, again, It's Wonderful Life still wins. So
Maybe I'm a little mad that It's a Wonderful Life didn't actually win.
it did. That's how we do
No,
it.
no,
It
like
wasn't even a
in real
conflict, was it?
life in the
Oh, in
Oscars.
real life, in the Oscars, yeah. Well, again, it wasn't a really big hit. Like it kind of
True.
took years to get appreciated. But hey, that's why we have Picture This, to give due to the films that we think deserved it. Moneyball didn't win the Oscar, but it won our prize.
Yeah.
Inglorious Bastards didn't win the Oscar, it won our prize. This film didn't win the Oscar, but it won our prize. It's a Wonderful Life is our
Yeah.
1946 winner. And now we're transferring into our acting prizes, starting with Best Actor. And Chad is going to tell us what I believe I already know is coming,
You
but why
know.
don't you tell us our Best Actor?
You know.
Is it the deer from the Yearling?
Yes. It is
Ah, I knew it.
Andy Serkis's The Deer from the Yearling 2025. It's James Stewart.
Yeah.
I had to go with this one. It's just for me, it's the most obvious pick. He does like the most work in his role. He not only plays that hopeful kid in the beginning, like when he's like in high school, graduating high school and stuff like that. But then he just shows such a like arc to the bad where it's like the negative where he's so overridden by this town and all of his responsibilities and all the weight that's on his shoulders. He really shows that in his like anger and desperation and fear about like losing that money, and like that loss of that money is just like the worst thing. And he comes home and his kids like trying to like do something with them, play with them, and he's just like, I've lost everything and my life is going to shambles. And his wife sees that he's freaking out. He just does that so well. And then learning all the stuff with Clarence just to come home and be that hopeful, I still have a great family and I'm happy. And, Clarence got his wings. And it's the full experience with that James Stewart. He's such an icon.
Yeah. My best actor, that was my backup, but my best actor is Harold Russell for Best
Ooh,
Years of Our Lives.
okay.
Again, he wins 2 Academy Awards on the night.
Mhm.
One for because he was an actor with a disability, he was able to overcome that and be in this movie and do so well. But just because he's a really good actor, I think he has some of the best moments in that movie. That moment where the tear rolls down his eye, I cry, I burst out into tears. It's such a beautiful moment in one of my favorite films, and I think he's the character I think most of the audience leaves thinking about, but
Yeah.
for a good reason. Like he's the one who has some of the best moments. He was amazing, and I want to give him his due, because also I don't think he did a lot of other work, which is sad, probably because
No.
of his disability, and that's sad. So I'm very happy to give him that. Moving on to Best Actress. This is interesting. This rarely happens where I pick a Best Actress from my least favorite film on the slate. But I think the best thing about The Razor's Edge was its acting. And I'm actually going against my whole Umbridge philosophy. And I'm going with Gene Tierney for The Razor's Edge.
Okay.
Because she plays the despicable woman so well in this that like that stuff was the most engaging for me because she was so good at what she was doing, and like she was giving me such a reason to root for him and against her. And I think that's such an unconventional villain too, because it's kind of what we were talking about with Mr. Potter. It's the real villain, just because she's this entitled person who wants what she wants, and she wants riches and a family and to travel and all that stuff. And he's like, I just want to like be a free spirit and do my thing. And she's like, then we got to hold off our engagement. I'm gonna go marry a rich guy. And she's so menacing and devious, and I love it. So I'm giving Jean Tierney my Best Actress award.
Great. I love that pick. I'm not picking this one. It's my runner-up, which I didn't know if you were going to pick from the same movie, Anne Baxter, because I just thought
that's your runner-up, or that's your pick?
My runner-up. Okay. It's not the one I'm picking because I have I think a slightly better one. But this one, I loved Sophie and her kind of downwards, but I didn't love it. But she's such well acted when she like missed her like daughter and stuff like that. Yeah, I just wanted to shout her out because also I don't think she really gets much love anywhere else. But yeah, I'm just gonna go with the same shit in this one. I'm gonna go with Donna Reed as Mary. Because I almost was going with Anne Baxter. I was like, wait a second, Mary from It's a Wonderful Life. What am I talking about? For me, that's also like the obvious choice. She is kind of like the backbone of George Bailey in the movie, and just all the scenes with her, propping him up and just like, kind of being devastated when he's reacting to her and stuff like that, smashing the record out of anger. The stuff about being naked in the bush, and then, this kind of a fun thing, like a desperation to get her robe back, but then, being like, oh no, what's happened now, when he heard news and she doesn't know what it is. And and then just like the end stuff with, reacting to him as he's on this angry tirade in his family home, and just noticing that while everyone else is, happy and fun Christmas time, he's freaking out. And I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a great performance, and I kind of knew you were going there, and I wanted you to like relish in your love for it, because this is our Christmas episode and you're the Christmas fiend. So
thank you.
But she was I think she was my backup. I knew I didn't need a backup, so I didn't really have one, but so to recap, our best actors, my best actor is Harold Russell for The Best Years of Our Lives. Chad's is James Stewart for It's a Wonderful Life. My best actress is Jean Tierney in The Razor's Edge. And Chad's best actress is Donna Reed for It's a Wonderful Life. And our best picture for 1946 is It's a Wonderful Life. Now, before we tease the next episode, I want to do something called the Picture This Hall of Fame. It is the end of this year of Picture This, and I kind of teased this earlier. I want to do a little remembrance of all of our choices thus far.
Whoa.
Just to recap, I don't have pictures for all of them, but I do have special distinctions. Like, I won't rattle off all the names of the actors because that would take too long. But in chronological order, our best pictures so far are for 1939, The Wizard of Oz. For 1944, Double Indemnity. For 1946, It's a Wonderful Life. For 1947, Miracle on 34th Street. Look at that, back to back. 1961, Judgment at Nuremberg. 1967, The Graduate. 1973, the actual Best Picture winner, The Sting. 1975, Jaws. 1977, Star Wars. 1980, The Elephant Man. 1991, the actual winner of that year, The Silence of the Lambs. 1994, The Shawshank Redemption. 1998, the actual winner from that year, Shakespeare in Love. 2001, The Lord of the Rings and Fellowship of the Ring. 2002, the actual winner of that year, Chicago. 2003, the actual winner of that year, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. 2007, There Will Be Blood. 2009, Inglourious Bastards. 2011, Moneyball. 2012, Django Unchained. 2020, the actual winner of that year, Nomadland. And 2021, the actual winner of that year, Coda. And lastly, what I want to do is I want to go through, these are our official inductees of the Picture This Hall of Fame. So once an actor wins 2 prizes, they become a member of the Hall of Fame. So the actors that have won 2 prizes for Picture This, we have Mr. Richard Dreyfuss, who won for American Graffiti from Chad, and then he won for The Goodbye Girl for also Chad, I think. Or no, I picked him. You picked Han Solo that year, I think. Richard Dreyfuss for 2 of them. He was on our pick for 1975. We had 2 others, but we also have Mr. Tom Hanks, who won for 1994 for for Forrest Gump, and also won for 1998 for Saving Private Ryan. We also have Sidney Poitier, who won 2 in the same year for 67. He won for both. My pick, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and Chad's pick, In the Heat of the Night. He won 2 in the same year. That's a pretty big feat. We have Mr. Tim Robbins, who won the very first one for Chad for Shawshank Redemption, also won for Chad for Mystic River. We have the only woman to ever win twice, Sissy Spacek, who won in 1980 for Dan Skip Allen's pick for Coal Miner's Daughter. And she also won for, I believe it was your pick for In the Bedroom. And now just joining the list, we have James Stewart, who had won for 1939, my pick for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Or it might have been your pick. No, it was your pick. I forget. It was my pick, but then you picked it, so I had to go to my backup. Anyway, he was your pick for 1939 for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He was your pick this year for It's a Wonderful Life. And there was only one actor who has been doing this 3 times, who got it 3 times. Chad, any guesses for who that is?
Oh, shoot. I'm gonna be here all day trying to sit here.
Here he is, right here, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh yeah,
he wins, of course, for Gangs of New York, for There Will Be Blood, and for Lincoln. He won all 3 of those, and I believe I gave him all 3 of those. Yep, because you gave it to Paul Dano for There Will Be Blood, and you also had a different pick. For
I still love him.
No, I know you love him. No, I'm just saying, I'm taking the credit. I gave him a 3-peat. But once an actor hits 2, they will be in the Hall of Fame. I had Gregory Peck's picture there just in case, but he hasn't hit it yet. He may hit it someday soon. But Daniel Day-Lewis, Richard Dreyfuss, Tom Hanks, Sidney Poitier, Tim Robbins, Sissy Spacek, and James Stewart are the official 7 in the honorary inductee first class of the Picture of This Hall of Fame.
So I love that.
That's pretty fun. Those are all the people that have gotten multiple awards. And it's time to announce next month. Hurrah. Next month, we are starting another series. We're doing a series where we will be covering all 3 films in the Godfather trilogy. We're going to do all 3 years. January is going to be the first Godfather. February is going to be the second one. March is going to be the Oscars, and then April is going to be the third one. So and the third one is also Chad's birth year, which would have been in March, but because it's the Oscars, it's a month later. So April will be celebrating March, which will be celebrating Chad, which will be celebrating 1990, which is his birth year. So this works out perfectly, since March is always going to be an Oscar year. But next month is 1972, and we do have a guest coming back. Dan Skip Allen will be back. Yep, he's going to do the first Godfather. He wanted to be in all 3. We'll see how it goes the first one, but scheduling sometimes gets tough. But he's definitely going to be on this first one. And we're going to be covering these 5 films for 1972: Cabaret, Deliverance, The Emigrants, The Godfather, and Sounder. So those are the 5 films, all short titles, all either one word or one word with the. So they're all very short titles, all going to be pretty fun to put on that graphic. But I'm excited to start this Godfather series. This trilogy. We're just about 2 hours, Chad. Any last thoughts on this year, on the show, on this specific year, on the next year we're about to cover? What do you think?
Yep. Well, first I'll say I've seen The Godfather multiple times. I've seen The Godfather Part 2 once, and I've never seen the third one. So this is going to be an interesting slate. And as far as the actual next months, I've seen The Godfather and I've seen Deliverance. So I'm very interested to see the other 3 I haven't seen and to revisit these other ones. I actually did revisit The Godfather when they re-released it in the theaters. But I like it. I like it a lot. So I'm interested to rewatch it again and rewatch the entire trilogy, like almost back to back, but not really.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you have any thoughts, but there's one thing I wanted to do with you real quick before we close out.
Sure. Go for it, Chad.
Okay. Will you say hee-haw with me?
Hee-haw?
Hee-haw.
Hee-haw. Hee-haw.
From It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes.
And then I also wanted to say, wish I had $1 million. Hot dog.
Love it. Thank you all for watching so much. You can find Chad, of course, at his channel. He plugs it here all the time. So go check it out. We're doing some cool rankings over there, including a big Disney ranking that's coming out soon. And he's always here on Picture This. He's always around on trivia. You all just saw that title match. Wasn't it cool? I'm not going to spoil it here because Chad doesn't know who wins. But it was a fun title match, wasn't it, Chad? Because this is coming out after that. But I got to go edit that.
Can't wait to see it.
Can't wait for it. You can find me at Dylan_Randazzo, Twitter and Letterboxd, and Dill Pickle Movie Network, where you got more shows here. Lots of cool stuff planned. Something really, really cool in February, which I'll announce very soon on the channel soon, but it's in the works. I'm very excited, and we'll see you next month with Dan for The Godfather and all of 1972. We'll see you then.